Hannity, and tonight I have a message for all the liberals and the members of the media who are cheering about the Ninth Circuit Court's decision to uphold the suspension of President Trump's temporary travel ban. It's time to put petty politics aside and start caring about the safety and security of the American people. This is a wake-up call, and that is tonight's opening monologue. As of this very moment, refugees and other travelers from Iraq, Iran, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, and Yemen are still allowed to enter the United States, blocking President Trump's plan for extreme vetting. Right now, our guard is down, and people are pouring into this country. Now, earlier today, President Trump had this to say about the Ninth Circuit Court's ruling. Take a look.
We are going to keep our country safe. We are going to do whatever is necessary to keep our country safe. We had a decision which we think we'll be very successful with. It shouldn't have taken this much time because safety is a primary reason. One of the reasons I'm standing here today is the security of our country. The voters felt that I would give it the best security. So we'll be doing something very rapidly having to do with additional security for our country. You'll be seeing that sometime next week. In addition, we will continue to go through the court process, and ultimately, I have no doubt that we'll win that particular case.
Now, President Trump, he gets it. He's making the safety and security of you, the American people, a top priority, and for good reason. Now, we have been warned by top Obama administration intelligence and national security officials that ISIS could infiltrate the refugee population. They've all said it. Watch this.
Would that bring in Syrian refugees pose a greater risk to Americans?
I mean, it's clearly a population of concern.
The concern is in Syria, the lack of our footprint on the ground in Syria, that the databases won't have the information we need. So it's not that we have a lack of process, it's there's a lack of information.
And that obviously raises grave concern as to being able to do proper background checks of the individuals coming into the country.
Yes.
I don't obviously put it past the likes of ISIL to infiltrate operatives among these refugees.
We can only query against that which we have collected. And so if someone has never made a ripple in the pond in Syria in a way that would get their identity or their interests reflected in our database, we can query our database till the cows come home, but we're not going to. There will be nothing show up because we have no record on that person.
There is some fear that some of these refugees may actually be posing as refugees, but they might actually be Al-Qaeda or ISIS terrorists trying to sneak into Europe or the United States. What do you make of that?
Well, certainly that's a possibility. I mean, you can't dismiss that out of hand.
We should be conscious of the potential that Daesh may attempt to embed agents within that population.
Essentially, a guy who's a dictator admitting that some refugees are definitely terrorists. Wow. Now, to make things worse, the Washington Times is reporting, quote, 77% of refugees allowed into the U.S. since the travel ban began come from the 7 suspect countries. And that's not all. Today, the people in Iran, they were celebrating the 38th anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution by burning American flags and once again chanting death to America. Now, clearly, the people you just witnessed chanting death to America, they don't like you, they don't like us, they don't like our way of life, and they're definitely not in search of the American dream. Now, here's the most alarming part of all. The left is in a pre-9/11 mentality. They've forgotten the past. And I fear, as a country, we may be doomed to repeat this. So to all of you out there applauding this Ninth Circuit decision, listen up. It's time for a very important history lesson. You may remember September 11, 2001, America changed forever after an al-Qaeda orchestrated terror attack devastated our country and led to the deaths of nearly 3,000 people. And as documented by the 9/11 Commission report, Dr. Condoleezza Rice testified that for years, quote, the terrorists were at war with us, but we were not yet at war with them. Now, that finding is so compelling because in the years leading up to 9/11, it was no secret that Islamic extremists were hell-bent on destroying the United States and killing the American people. In fact, leading up to 9/11, terrorists were responsible for, remember, the bombing of the Khobar Towers, the bombing of the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya, a deadly attack on the USS Cole, and even the first World Trade Center attack. In 1993, we had plenty of warnings. We have a similar buildup now in violence all across the world. Europe has been rocked by terror attack after terror attack, and here at home, Islamic extremists. Remember San Bernardino, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Chattanooga, Fort Hood, the Boston Marathon. ISIS has repeatedly declared war on this country, just as al-Qaeda did prior to 9/11. And right now, those so-called journalists and the alt-left radical mainstream media, they're lying. And they're calling President Trump's temporary travel ban a religious test or a Muslim ban. And they are doing a complete disservice to you, the American people. If we do not take this threat seriously, it's not a matter of if. It is a certainty. It's a matter of when we will be hit again. It's going to happen. So to all of the people conspiring out of political correctness, trying to stop the president's safety measures, I'm warning you, you will be tied to all of this. And yes, I'm talking about Senator Chuck Schumer and his crocodile tears and the hypocrisy he's shown, President Obama, who appeased Iran and couldn't even say the words radical Islam, the liberal and Democratic politicians, members of the mainstream media. I've said this many times to all of those out there who are more worried about the slight inconvenience of a few travelers versus the lives of the American people. To you, my message is clear. If another 9/11 style attack is committed here in the United States, blood will be on your hands. Deal with that. Joining me now is former Trump campaign manager, partner at Avenue strategist Corey Lewandowski from the American Center for Law and Justice, our friend Jay Sekulow back. Good to see you both. All right, Corey, let me start with you. This is so simple and basic. Inconvenience versus gambling with the lives of Americans. Why is this even problematic? Why is the left so dug into this pre-9/11 mindset?
Sean, what I don't understand is the notion that we don't want to put America first. You know, this is what the president talked about in the campaign. This is what he's implementing, and what he has said very clearly is that his priority is to make sure that the people of this country, the United States of America, are safe from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And what that means is before we let people into the country who we have no idea who they are or what their intentions are, we're going to slow down. We're going to have a better vetting system. And how is the left even trying to argue that this isn't in the best interest of all Americans? They are so out of touch with what's going on in America. This is why they continue to lose elections.
All right, let me go to Jay. Jay, you have been so all over the legal side of all of this. The president, earlier today on Air Force One, suggested what you had been suggesting last night, that he move forward with another executive order rather than going back to the Seattle court or going to Justice Kennedy, who then would make a decision one way or the other, or send it to the entire Supreme Court. I think you like the idea of a new executive order, correct?
Yep. Yes. Because what that will do is rectify any inconsistency or at least perceived inconsistency between the executive order and the directive from the White House. What the president simply does is change a paragraph, take a paragraph from the White House directive, put it into the executive order, reissue the executive order. It moots out the existing Ninth Circuit case, moots out the Washington State federal court case. The same groups will file a lawsuit, and they may win at the district court, and they may win at the Court of Appeals. But let me tell you what happens when that one goes to the Supreme Court of the United States. You don't have to worry about a 4-4 split. That's 8-0. The president has the authority, period.
Well, let me
and there's
stop you
no
there.
confusion.
Why would the change of one paragraph, and you were nice enough, kind enough to send over suggestive language that you liked to me earlier today on my radio show. But why would the change of one paragraph make all the difference? And even though you recognize that the Seattle court may go the same way, the Ninth Circuit predictably could go the same way, why would this make all the difference before the Supreme Court?
Yeah, because for the Supreme Court, what they're going to look at is an issue. What is the issue that will be before the Supreme Court? And that issue will be, does the president have the statutory and constitutional authority to issue the executive order? And did that executive order fit within that statutory authority? The answer to that will be yes, especially if you end what they call, I don't want to get too technical here, the due process issue, this issue of were the people that had green cards of visa included or not. Initially, it wasn't clear in the executive order. Then there was a White House directive saying, no, we're not going to apply it to the green card holders, to the folks with visa, the students. Now, if you clarify that, there's no ambiguity. So there's only one thing that can be looked at. Does the president have that statutory authority? Is there a constitutional basis?
But that was really the question before the court this time. I mean, when you have a judicial activist court like the Ninth Circuit or this judge in Seattle, I mean, and I guess this is an important political question, Corey, is what Democrats can't get done at the ballot box by convincing Americans to vote for them. What they can't get done legislatively, that's why judicial activism is such a danger, because they look for courts to legislate from the bench. That's why this election, I think, was so important.
Sean, this election was so clear, right? This was so clear. The Democrats' ideas have been, just completely decimated. The American people have rejected them wholeheartedly. What you look forward to in 2018 is a number of Democrat U.S. senators sitting in states that are going to be up for re-election, in states that Donald Trump won. You look at Florida, Missouri, Montana. You go right down the list, Ohio. These are places where the American people voted overwhelmingly for President Trump and his agenda, and now you've got Democrats sitting in those seats who are going to have to try and defend themselves against the Trump agenda. And the bottom line is the people of those states have rejected the left-leaning politics and the left-leaning agenda because they want a new course for America.
It's funny, Jay, I don't think they're honest people, but PolitiFact was trying to catch me all day on my statement that the Ninth Circuit is one of the most overturned, if not the most overturned, court of appeals in the country, relating their cases going up to the Supreme Court. Depending on the number of years you count, they're either one or two. Court of appeals in the country, relating their cases going up to the Supreme Court. Depending on the number of years you count, they're either one or two.
80% of the time. That's the ABA. And then if you look at the other data that's gathered by just going to the Supreme Court website, looking at the cases, doing the analysis, they're either number one most years. I mean, mostly number one. A couple of times they're number two. But if you look at it over, say, a decade, you're talking about an 80% overturn rate. So number one year, number two the next year, that tells you about their jurisprudence. I mean, my joke always was, if you win in the Ninth Circuit, that's not good news. You're going to lose at the Supreme Court.
So what the president now is leaning towards, which I know you agree with, the new executive order, and you're even predicting it might go exactly the same way at the court level and then up to the Ninth Circuit, but you say there's no way the Supreme Court would stay with that. History has proven you're probably right.
I just can't imagine the Supreme Court saying I can't imagine the Supreme Court saying the president have authority. They may try to raise that, religion clause issue of it's preferring religious minorities, but the Supreme Court, I've done those religion cases at the Supreme Court, and they know that that is not going to go anywhere with the U.S. Supreme Court. Nowhere. 8-0.
I agree with you. All right, guys, good to see you both. Appreciate it. And welcome back to Hannity. Former Marine Staff Sergeant Steve Gurn was working as a private security contractor in Iraq, well, at least until a few days ago, when he was forced to flee the country. Now, he posted a video on Facebook talking about President Trump's temporary travel ban. It got more than 44 million views. And joining us now to share his story is Steve Gurn. Steve, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
I know you say these are simple questions that you're asking, but they're really profound questions that clearly hit a nerve. Were you surprised by the 44 million views?
Absolutely, I was. I posted that at 11 o'clock at night, and I went to bed. Got up at 05 the next morning to get ready for mission. I was told that it had hit 1.1 million at that time. I didn't think anything of it. I kind of laughed it off, and I went out on mission, got my weapons, and came back from mission, put my weapons up, and was figuring about that time it was around 5 million views, and I was expecting, obviously, a call on the radio to make it to the office, and I shortly after got that call.
All right, so you really were advised this has gone so viral and people now know what you look like. You were sent home. Is there any chance you get to ever go back?
I don't know what the intentions are of the company I'm currently working for or employed by. I do know that I was removed, obviously, for safety issues. So I do not know exactly where we're going to go from here.
All right. Look, I guess what's so frustrating about this is, to me, it's a very simple equation. We're not saying that you can't come to America. We're saying that we need to check you out. What really bothers me deep down inside is when all our top intelligence officials are telling us that ISIS will infiltrate the refugee population. Well, ISIS may be evil, but that doesn't mean they're stupid. And I got to imagine that they would train people to withstand whatever questioning would come their way. How do you ever positively ascertain what is in somebody's heart if they want to come to America, if they want to come here for freedom, or they want to come here to proselytize, or they want to come here to hurt Americans and blow up a school or a mall or whatever?
You're really not going to be able to. And what I have learned over the years of working, in Iraq and Afghanistan is they're very good at manipulation. They can manipulate just about anyone, and they're really good at it. So they can tell you what they want you to hear, and they can keep that up for many, many years. And then eventually, when it's time, they'll do what they believe is right. And if that is to, hurt an American or hurt many of us at one time, they're going to do it.
I think your admonition, I know you said these are simple questions, but they're very deep, very profound, and very timely and relevant to the debate that's going on in the country. Sir, glad you got home safe. Thank you for being with us. Congratulations on the 44 million hits. And when we come back, a new report indicates how long it will take for the border wall to be built and how much it will cost. Welcome back to Hannity. So Reuters is reporting, citing a U.S. Department of Homeland Security internal report, that President Trump's border wall is projected to cost up to $21.6 billion and could take more than 3 years to construct. And while the border wall plans move ahead, protesters took to the streets of Phoenix on Wednesday night following the arrest of an illegal immigrant woman, a convicted criminal who was later deported. Joining us now with reaction is the Secretary of State of Kansas. Chris Kobach is with us. Good to see you, sir. How are you?
Great to be back with you.
I know a lot of people were pushing for you to be in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. I also understand you met with the president. Did you talk specifically about the wall?
We have talked about the wall, and I think he regards it as one of his top priorities in the White House to get this project done. The American people want it done, and it's doable. It's 1,989 miles of border. We only have about 386 miles right now that you would consider a true, impervious wall or serious fence. There's a lot to build, but we put a man on the moon, and this is not a high-tech project. This is a low-tech project. This is, getting barriers in place, and it'll get done.
To me, it's so basic and so fundamental and so simple, and just one of those common sense measures. Now, I understand the expense aspect of it, but I would ask the president numerous times when we were out traveling with him and the other candidates and some of the town halls we did with him, and he was very clear. He didn't expect Mexico to write him a check. He said, no, but when we renegotiate NAFTA or other trade deals or other economic deals, we will have so much of a financial benefit. That's how it'll get paid for. Do you agree that that is totally possible, as I do?
Yeah, I do. And Sean, there's actually probably half a dozen ways that we could recoup the money back from Mexico. We could do it through a surcharge on Mexican immigrants coming in, or non-immigrants, people coming in temporarily on their visas. We could do it through basically stopping remittances, the payments that illegal aliens and legal aliens send home to Mexico, and use that as leverage. There's so many ways we could get Mexico to effectively indirectly pay for this wall that I think it's silly that people question that it can't be done.
As one of the most outspoken advocates, as I have been in favor of this wall for many, many years, we're talking about the 2006 law allows for 700 plus miles to be built. Is that enough from your perspective? You think that's enough?
Well, the 2006 law demanded that it be built, and Congress wanted to make a statement. But, there doesn't have to be a statute from Congress ordering the executive branch to build the wall. There just needs to be funds from Congress. So, the 700 miles is not enough, but it's not like we need another act from Congress ordering President Trump to build the entire 2,000 miles. So we've got all the statutory authority we need. Now we just need funding to pay the price.
All right. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for your advocacy for our safety and security. We appreciate it. All right. When we come back, a new poll shows you, the American people, you trust the White House more than the alt-left radical mainstream media to be truthful. Can't blame them. Joe Concha, Lisa Booth, they'll weigh in. But first tonight.
I feel totally confident that we will have tremendous security for the people of the United States. We will be extreme vetting.
President Trump, he spoke about the need for extreme vetting at the White House today. Up next, we'll get reaction from Geraldo Rivera, Bo Dietl, as Hannity continues.
I feel totally confident that we will have tremendous security for the people of the United States. We will be extreme vetting. There are tremendous threats to our country. We will not allow that to happen. I can tell you that right now. We will not allow that to happen.
All right, that was President Trump talking about extreme vetting during today's joint press conference with the Japanese Prime Minister. Joining us now with reaction in New York City, mayoral candidate, our friend Bo Dietl, who, by the way, I'm endorsing, but if it hurts you, I'm not going to endorse you.
Yeah.
And
I am an
News,
independent. I am an independent. The Democrats stumped me.
You know, I want everyone in the audience to know.
Democrats stumped him?
You have not lived until you have been out on the town with Bo Dietl and Geraldo Rivera. The best days of my life are with these two guys.
Sean and I both endorse you, Bo.
Yeah,
well, I'm an independent conservative right now. Yeah. Well, all I can say is, Sean, my heart just dropped when we were watching that video from 9/11 because I was down there that day when those towers came down. And you know what? What's happening right now, Sean, is with this ban. Since this ban has been now released, all of a sudden 1,100 have come into our country of refugees. 1,100 from the 7 different countries that we're supposed to be banning. What my problem is right now is we forget real quickly in Syria, 2 of the passport places in the main cities in Syria were taken over by ISIS. They're printing their own passports. They have fake passports. We're not stopping them. Now they know they're like rats coming out of the sewer. Come to America. It's wide open right now. This is so damn ridiculous. Then you get attorney generals in that state of Washington patting each other on the back like they did something so good. All we want to do is know who's coming in, who wants to kill us Americans.
Let me bring Geraldo in here. Geraldo, you know, you and I get along, and we agree and disagree occasionally. I know that one of your most passionate issues is immigration. And, all right, so we have some differences on it. But this, to me, is something we probably will agree on. And that is, you want to come to our country. Our top intelligence officials, and now even President Assad is acknowledging terrorists are going to infiltrate the ISIS population, the refugee population.
First of all, I think
puts every American at risk.
You are a pure-hearted patriot. You're a sincere person, and I cherish our friendship. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about
friendship.
We're not talking about friendship. We're talking about because the President of the United States, the 45th President, is we are all proud to call him our friend as well. But what his Justice Department did in this case, and whoever counseled him on drafting that executive order, it was strictly,
but it really wasn't his Justice Department.
It was Little League. It was Bush League. You did at the top of this program, Sean. You put together, this is why we should be afraid. This is the danger posed by, immigration from these 7 troubled countries. I submit, did a better job. The producers of this program did a better job in presenting the risk, the imminence of the risk, than the federal government did in the case before the district court and before the Ninth Circuit.
Okay, I agree with you.
Mediocre. The president should dump this executive order right now, start all over again. If he wants to, give me a felt tip pen and a yellow pad. I'll give you an executive order that will be constitutional. For example, you are afraid of imminent ISIS attacks. So why do you stop the 7-year-old coming for the heart transplant, or you break up the elderly couple or the students that are matriculating in the state universities? But temporary can't be stupid.
But let me agree with one point, Geraldo. Geraldo, I heard the arguments that night, and I was screaming listening to them because you're right. In our sleep, all of us could have done a better job.
You could have handled
this was not
like that.
This was not Donald Trump's attorney general. He had not been approved yet, and that was the problem with the obstructionism, right?
Well, you can say that if Jeff Sessions had been in place, something would have been different. I tend to doubt it. For example, you and we had a debate over the order, and I said this isn't substantive. This is hubris. This is just action for action's sake. It's not decisive in the sense that it's designed to accomplish a result. For example, why do you not exclude people who already have green cards from your order? What about people with valid visas? People who are, global passports, who are already carefully vetted. You could do it in a way that all you end up doing is ticking off everybody and stimulating these demonstrations.
We all agree with that. So what we got to do right now, the president's got to immediately put another order, clarify what we got to do. This is life and death now. I was there September 11th when those buildings came down. I saw the destruction that people want against Geraldo. I'm real nervous about, because right now they're just coming in faster than ever, because now they know there's an opening there. Nobody's watching the gate, and they're all rushing in. And I'm nervous about this. President Trump should respond on this, get a new order immediately.
Here's what he says. Here's what the president can say. I declare victory. Why do I declare victory? Because under President Obama, there were 110,000 refugees approved for this program. Guess what? There are only going to be 50,000 this fiscal year. In other words, Donald Trump's actions have already sliced this program more than in half.
But we got to vet him, Geraldo, and you agree.
Well,
yeah, you agree. But you know what? We actually all agree here.
Extreme vetting, Sean? If you have a kid or a grandpa, or triplets that are 7 years old.
That's common sense applied to the law. You and I both agree.
Extreme vetting. Bo's a great cop. Bo could interview. He'd find out. I mean, you're not talking about 23-year-old strapping guys. You don't know where they've been.
Geraldo, let's look at the migration into Europe. 80% of them are young males, good fit young males.
I don't know that to be true. I don't know that to be true, Bo. And we're not talking about Europe. We're talking about the United States and the people coming in here.
All right, coming up, a new poll reveals the American people believe the Trump administration is more truthful than the mainstream media. Joe Concha, Lisa Booth, they react. Coming up straight ahead.
I happen to know how dishonest the media is. I happen to know that stories about me that should be good or bad, I don't mind a bad story if it's true, but I don't like bad stories. Stories that should be a positive story, when they make them totally negative, I understand the total dishonesty of the media better than anybody. And I let people know it. I mean, the media is a very, very dishonest arm, and we'll see what happens.
All right, that was President Trump calling out the dishonest press. Brand new poll released on Tuesday shows the majority of the American people agree with him. According to an Emerson College poll, 49% of registered voters believe that the Trump administration's truthful, compared to only 39% that said the media tells the truth. Now, the Hill's media reporter, Joe Concha, wrote about the poll's findings earlier this week, and President Trump tweeted it out. Joe now joins us, as well as Fox News contributor Lisa Booth. Well, Joe, I've known you for a long time. When I saw that, I'm thinking, this is great for Joe. The president just tweeted out his article. But the poll said, doesn't it speak volumes?
Well, we've known this for a while, Sean, right, that there is overwhelming bias in the media. And it's not something that I have to explain to your audience anymore. USA Today did a poll right before the election, and they asked, who do you think the American press is rooting for in this election, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? And by a 10-to-1 margin, they said, oh, of course, Hillary Clinton, including a majority of Democrats noticed that Democrats were obviously getting the benefit of the doubt from the press. So this is something that is no longer something that's a secret or I have to explain or you have to explain. Cat's out of the bag. And that's because of WikiLeaks, Sean. That was devastating to the fourth estate. That showed debate questions being shared in advance. Open collusion
but you know something,
with the Clinton
Joe,
campaign. Yeah.
Joe, and you and I discussed this. The media didn't cover WikiLeaks because it impacted them. Their collusion with Hillary Clinton and her campaign, and at the highest levels, the highest level of corruption we've seen. Lisa Booth, I want your thoughts.
Well, absolutely, Sean. Look, and I think what we've seen from the media is really this concerted effort to undermine the credibility of President Trump. But what they don't seem to understand is that their credibility is at risk here, too. And what we've seen in just the recent polling that Joe pointed out, and also just from Gallup, is that trust in media is at an all-time low. And President Trump is right when he says that the media can be blatantly dishonest. We've seen stories even from the Washington Post recently, literally making up meetings that never happened between Steve Bannon and Homeland Security Secretary Kelly. Secretary Kelly said that that meeting, that story is a fantasy, and it's been discredited because that meeting just simply didn't happen. And the reporter actually never went and reached out to the White House for a comment. So when you see that kind of reporting, it's just sort of laughable for the media to continue to try to undermine the Trump administration and undermine their credibility when they don't have any credibility.
You know, we have this list that we've been putting up on the screen all the time about at least 16 that we've identified, examples of stories, fake news stories that have run since Trump's been president. But then there are other stories, Joe, like I'm watching Chuck Todd said, oh, isn't this a religious litmus test? And how many people in the media have said on the refugee issue and the executive order of the president, how many have gone as far as to say, oh, this is a Muslim ban when it doesn't impact about 90% of the world's Muslim population, 43 majority Muslim countries not impacted? It's not even dishonesty. It's an outright lie because they know the truth.
Right, and there's no accountability. That's the problem, Sean, that with all these reporters at senior levels, the New York Times, Politico, showing to share stories in advance, for example, were they reprimanded? Were they fired? No, they were promoted in certain cases. Glenn Thrush at Politico literally shared stories in advance with John Podesta asking for approval while he was at Politico. And the New York Times knows this, and they hired him
but they
to
did
cover
the same thing.
the Trump White House. So here's the thing.
Fits right in.
Right, so we know that they're biased, and we know that they're corrupt. But the priorities, Sean, also are completely out of whack. Think about the blistering pace that the Trump administration has been acting. There's been an executive order at least once every other day, 11 total. There was a Supreme Court justice that was nominated. How many times have you seen in any major newspapers or any major outlets analysis around what happens now that we're going to have a conservative-leaning Supreme Court? Or what does it mean that we're dropping out of TPP? Or that federal law enforcement may be getting involved in taking on gangs, which are responsible for thousands of deaths in this country. The priorities, Sean, also are completely out of whack.
I couldn't agree with Joe more, Lisa. And the way I've been saying it, while they're focused on their fake news stories and their petty attacks and calling Trump a liar, they're missing there's a huge shock and awe campaign and a political earthquake that is erupting under their feet. And they don't get it. They don't get Trump. I don't think they ever will they?
Well, and we saw that in the general election as well. And I think also the reason why their credibility is in question and why voters don't trust them is there's a clear double standard that exists, Sean. And I can tell you as someone who's worked on Republican campaigns and has worked for Republican members of Congress, it is so clear and it so exists. And we just see the double standard between the fact that the media wants to call into question the credibility and the trustworthiness of this administration. But what about Benghazi? What about the blatant lies that the Obama administration told us? What about the fact that Ben Rhodes bragged about lying to the media and the public about the Iran deal? What about the fact that Jonathan Gruber basically said the American people were stupid, and that's how the Obamacare law essentially got passed? Where was the outrage then from the media? Why weren't they holding the Obama administration's feet to the fire?
You are so right, and it is journalism is dead, and we have an informational crisis, but people are voting with their clickers. I can tell you that. Guys, good to see you both. Great column. Congratulations, Joe. All right, when we come back, we need your help on an important question of the day, and we are introducing a new segment that you can participate in. That's next. All right, time for our big question of the day today. Do you think liberals are gambling with the lives and the safety of you, the American people? Go to Facebook.com/Sean Hannity, @Sean Hannity on Twitter. Let us know what you think. All right, also tonight, big announcement. We want to talk about a new segment we will be starting on the program. It's called the Hannity Hotline. If you have something you want to say to me, nice, mean, whatever, anything you want, we'll be playing some of your comments on air. All right, call the number you see right there on your screen, 877-225-8587, 877-225-8587, and we'll start playing some of your messages next week. Can't wait to hear from you, especially those that love me or hate me. Anyway, that's all the time we have left this evening. As always, thank you for being with us. Hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Too much to say.
The president pledges his administration next week will unveil new security measures to keep America safe. Mr. Trump insists safety of all Americans is his top priority.
We'll be doing something very rapidly having to do with additional security for our country. You'll be seeing that sometime next week.
We take up the left's efforts to block the Trump administration at every turn. no matter the risk to national security. The Weekly Standard's Fred Barnes joins me. Also tonight, shocking animosity from the left. Black Lives Matter demonstrators physically blocking Education Secretary Betsy DeVos as she tried to enter a Washington, D.C. middle school this morning. We take up the left's ignorance and intolerance and its cost with the Five's co-host, Kimberly Guilfoyle. General Jack Keane with me tonight as we take up Iran's threat not only to the Middle East, but to the world. Good evening, everybody. A White House source telling Fox News tonight that the White House will not likely appeal the Ninth Circuit three-judge panel decision on his extreme vetting order to an en-banc session of the full Ninth Circuit Court. The administration could file, we're told, an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court and is investigating whether to fight it out as well in the U.S. District Court in Seattle on the merits of the case. President Trump today vowed quick action.
There are tremendous threats to our country. We will not allow that to happen. I can tell you that right now. We will not allow that to happen. So we'll be going forward. We'll be doing things to continue to make our country safe. It will happen rapidly, and we will not allow people into our country who are looking to do harm to our people.
Fox News Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is at the White House following the story throughout. Good evening, John. What is the latest?
Lou, good evening to you. A little hard to figure that out because there was some cross signals and some mixed signals and some crossed wires a little while ago. About 5 o'clock, we were told that it was unlikely that the White House would appeal the Ninth District Court of Appeals decision. This was a three-judge panel on the temporary restraining order when it refused to issue a stay. We were told that it was not likely that they were going to appeal that to either the Supreme Court or to an en-banc session of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then we learned a little while later that, wait a second, no, maybe they still might take that to the Supreme Court. And then Reince Priebus, the Chief of Staff, came out to tell me that all options are on the table, that they could go to the Supreme Court, they could go to an en-banc session of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then we learned that one judge from the Ninth Circuit wants all of his colleagues, or her colleagues, we're not sure if it's a man or a woman, to vote on whether or not the Ninth Circuit en-banc should rehear the case that the three-judge panel denied the stay of. So now the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reaching out to the White House and to the plaintiffs in the case, the state of Washington and Minnesota, for briefs as to whether or not that case should be reheard. I informed Reince Priebus of that, and he ran back inside the White House, obviously, to confer with his colleagues. And then there's something else that's afoot here, Lou, and that is that the White House may rewrite the executive order on extreme vetting, tighten up the language so that there's no legal problem with it. Aboard Air Force One on his way down to Mar-a-Lago in West Palm Beach, President Trump spoke to the pool about it. Here's what he said.
You also talk about the unfortunate part is it takes time statutorily, so it takes a little time. We'll win that battle, but we also have a lot of other options, including just filing a brand new order on Monday. Could very well be, but I like to keep you, I'd like to surprise you. We need speed for reasons of security, so it could very well be that we do that.
A little difficult to hear there, Lou, because of all the airplane noise, but basically the president said they might rewrite the order, and that would be the extreme vetting executive order. One of the big problems that the Ninth Circuit judges had with it was that it didn't have a specific carve-out for legal permanent residents in this country. There were also some concerns that people who were here on visas, if they were students or if they were professors, might not be able to get back into the country if they left to go visit family back at home. So the White House mulling all of this over, potentially rewriting this executive order to tighten up the language. Some other executive orders potentially coming down next week, Lou, and maybe one that I saw that's been circulating here at the White House that would keep the detention center at Guantanamo Bay open for an indefinite period of time. As with everything here, it's all a moving target, Lou. So we get this kind of minute by minute, hour by hour.
the complexity that is presented to, well, first of all, to the president and his administration by all of these events that are taking place, and some of them historic, including the Ninth Circuit Court ruling. I mean, everyone does need a program, and the press and you, John, you know, following all of this. It's got to be a difficult chore. Any president is difficult to cover, but this administration, with all of the incoming, all of the initiatives that he has going, just to put it, let's make sure I've got the score correct. This is 23 executive actions and memoranda right now in 3 weeks. Is that right?
I mean, it's a tremendous number of pieces of executive action that have come out of this White House. No legislation at this point. And don't forget, Lou, the other thing that's going on here at the White House is this president has got a lot of enemies, a lot of opponents. So literally everything that comes out of this White House is somehow going to be opposed by one group or another. We talk about this one lawsuit filed by the state of Minnesota and Washington State in Seattle in federal district court. You know, Judge Napolitano's probably got the better figure on this, but I think it's something like 23 or 40 suits that are just waiting to go against what the president has been doing. So, I mean, everything that comes out of here gets, you know, gets contradicted on the other side as well. So there's a lot to look after here.
Talking with the judge last night, his count was at that point 47.
47. Okay.
Knowing the way of this thing, the number probably has risen. It probably hasn't declined in the 12 hours or 24 hours difference. John, thanks for keeping us up to date, and as always, doing a terrific job for us from the White House. Thank you.
Trying hard. Thanks, Lou.
Yes, sir. Donald Trump has referred to the Ninth Circuit Court ruling as a, quote, political decision. And by the way, he's absolutely right. And here's why. Let's take a look at our supposedly impartial judiciary. First, the liberal or left-wing Ninth Circuit Court is the most overturned appellate court in the land. It has an 80% reversal rate, that according to the American Bar Association. Think of that. 80% of its rulings are overturned. That study by the Bar Association looking at 10 terms of the Ninth Circuit Court. Liberal majorities now control 9 of the 13 Circuit Court of Appeals. That is 70% of them, and primarily because of former President Obama, who managed to place more than a third of the 179 judges on the federal appellate courts. And the liberal slant also found in federal district courts. 51% are Democratic appointees. Only 34% are Republican. And that difference is 14%. And those district court judges, well, we don't have judges. Those seats are vacant. Trump has a monumental, extraordinary opportunity to begin turning the troubling trend to the left around in our judiciary, with 118 total judicial vacancies right now. That includes 91 in the district courts, 18 in the appellate courts, and of course the one Supreme Court justice that Neil Gorsuch has been nominated to fill. Our first guest tonight says the law is now on President Trump's side. Joining me now, the executive editor at the Weekly Standard, Fred Barnes. Fred, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
I mean, here we are at Friday, and it has been another extraordinary week, a third week of this presidency in terms of news and all of the challenges that this president is facing.
Yeah, indeed. He's done a great deal, but one thing he needs to do now is to get lawyers who won't let him down, as he's been let down so far on this immigration case. Look, the president has, under the Constitution, the right to create and enforce immigration policy. There's statutory law that gives him that. Instead, his lawyers are arguing about, well, the president, here's why he did this order and so on, and the judges are asking about the president's motives, and their lawyer is talking about that. But the most glaring area was this, that all these judges at the district level and the appeals level have raised this question, saying, well, gee, these 7 countries, they haven't said any terrorists haven't come from there at all since 9/11. And in fact, and the Justice Department lawyer for President Trump didn't know that there had been more than 60 cases, convictions. And he said he didn't know. I mean, the representation.
I understand your frustration with the Justice Department attorney, whose performance was, well, left something
abysmal,
perhaps considerable to be desired. But perhaps you should be inquiring of the district court judge for the Western District of the state of Washington and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and the three-judge panel who didn't even look at the statutory basis for the president's authority nor the Constitution. Instead, they started looking to, quote, the merits. In other words, trying to supplant the presidency with her own very clever and highly knowledgeable understanding of national security issues. It was a farce on every level. I wonder, by the way, Fred, this one appellate judge from the Ninth Circuit who's now is considering an en banc hearing of this case, perhaps he or she, we don't know which, whoever requested it, is embarrassed at what those three judges did, because for right now, not only is it the most overturned circuit court in the country of the 13, it is also embarrassingly and utterly, I mean, it is a farce, without question.
Well, certainly the Ninth Circuit is, and has been for many years. It is the most liberal appeals court in the country, and it is overturned just as rapidly and as frequently as you mentioned. But Donald Trump can't change that in the short run, but he can change his legal defense, supporting this policy, which is popular politically, but it just hasn't been argued in favor of it effectively. An argument, look, if I'm not a lawyer, if I know the arguments that are the paramount ones here,
you're not a national security. You're not a national security advisor either, Fred. But I'm going to ask you this question. Okay. General Flynn talked about sanctions, apparently, with the Russians before he moved to the White House and the administration. He says he can't say that he remembers it, but he can't say that he didn't. A national security advisor who doesn't remember the basic elements of a relationship with one of the two principal, if you will, geopolitical rivals of this country, what are we to make of it?
We're to make of it that it was entirely improper. There's some suggestion that it was illegal for him to do that. Here he was a month before Donald Trump became president, and it had already been announced that General Flynn was going to be his national security advisor. But what is he thinking? You know, talking, I mean, I don't know whether the Logan Act applies here, but here he was dealing with the Russian ambassador, and that was entirely improper. You know, there have been some complaints about General Flynn before. Oh, yeah. I've never met the man, but I thought from the beginning that John Bolton, the former State Department official going back to the Bush administration, should have been the national security advisor. And maybe now's the time to make that happen.
Fred, thank you very much for that impartial judgment and recommendation. Thanks so much, as always. Great to see you. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Fred.
You too.
Joining me now, the co-host of The Five, Kimberly Guilfoyle. Great to have you here.
Great to be here with you, Lou, and I can't stand it for another minute, these education obstructionists, and that's what they are. And I'm an educator myself. I worked in special education, children, teaching them, children with special needs, learning differences, and my son was in public school in New York, been in private school in New York, just to see the difference, and comparing that even with San Francisco and schools across the country. Education is of paramount importance, and school choice should also matter. And it really sometimes depends on where you're born, where you live, what school district, and you have unions obstructing all along the way, trying to keep tenure for teachers that are unfit to educate.
You know, this is, and what is Black Lives Matter doing? They're denying an education, a secretary of education who wants to help, who wants to improve, and they have some bloody message they want to carry out that has no sense, no rhyme, no reason.
And if you question them, they wouldn't be able to answer anything or talk about the education system or what kind of needs
and the
that
people
children
behind
have.
them, the people funding them, the people organizing are utterly, I mean, they're just more of the deplorable left.
Yeah, well, they should be punished. I mean, it's terrible to try and deprive a child of an education so that they can better themselves and their family going forward. It's very disconcerting to me. Let the woman go to the schools, get the information and try to make it better.
They're scared to death
well,
of it.
Of
But
course
you know why?
they are.
Have we got these statistics? I just want everybody to see what's happening in this country, and that is enrollment. Students in public charter schools by city. This is in Flint, Michigan. They're moving from the public educational system where there's no discipline, there's violence, there is no quality education in too many of these schools, public schools, which is has always been
too many
the
students
great
in the class,
equalizer in our society. Could we see that, please, again, so that everybody could see it? Put up the full screen, please. Flint, Michigan, 53% of them now in public charter schools.
Yeah.
In the same in Detroit, Kansas City, 43%. In New Orleans, it's 92%. Wow. That doesn't include the private charter schools. It doesn't. I mean, parochial schools and private schools. I mean, this is what's going on. They're scared to death. The public education.
There's been a big fight about this in New York City.
Yeah.
As well, you know, and by the way, we've had to be able to get up in arms about education, to be able to provide what children need to succeed going forward, to stop a cycle of poverty and violence in neighborhoods so they can have economic opportunity and be the masters of their own destiny.
Two realities that are demonstrated in that chart, because it's also happening nationwide. And that it is, one, the teachers' unions are failing. They're not only failing, but they're now part of the problem. And these are young children who are being, and their families are making a decision to get away from them and get to somewhere and to somewhere that offers them the chance to get a quality education.
It's really true, but shouldn't that be something that every child is entitled to be able to have that kind of choice? And charter schools have found a way to educate and succeed. That should be embraced. So they're blocking the car and blocking the doors, essentially, to education quality in this country.
Kimberly Guilfoyle, there are a lot of things going on right now with Kellyanne Conway, and she's the counselor to the president.
Certainly.
I thought it was very funny that Hillary Clinton tweeted this out, if we could show that. 3-0, talking about the court ruling by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's almost embarrassing to refer to that as a court, but nonetheless.
Right.
And Conway,
they're the worst. By the way, they're
Conway
overruled 80% of the time by the United States Supreme Court. All right, good job, Lou.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I do want to point out Kellyanne Conway, her response to this, if we had put that up, which I thought, there you go, Hillary. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
Do you love it?
I do love it. That's the way we put it up there. You found me out.
This pleases you, doesn't it,
It does indeed. Kimberly, thanks so much.
Me too. Go Kellyanne.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Kimberly.
All right, it's been
Be
fun.
sure to vote on our poll tonight. The question is the left-wing judiciary undermining our republic? Let me repeat that. Is the left-wing judiciary undermining our republic? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. We'd like to hear from you on this one.
Hint, yes.
And follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. And on Wall Street, stocks at all-time highs again. Record closings. I think that the President of the United States is getting a little more popular than the media is ever going to be able to stand. The Dow up 97 points, a new record high close. The S&P up 8. The Nasdaq up 19, all closing at new record highs. Volume on the big board, 3.4 billion shares for the week. The Dow, the S&P, the Nasdaq posting gains of about 1% since the markets. Since the election, the market's posting almost $2.5 trillion in increased market cap. A pretty good day. Crude oil up more than 1.5% today, near $54 a barrel. Listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast on the Salem Radio Network, please. Up next, National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn under fire over conversations he may have had with the Russian ambassador before President Trump took office. We'll have a full report on the matter here next. Stay with us. New questions tonight about the President's National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn, and a phone call that he had apparently with the Russian ambassador, a call made before President Trump took the oath of office. Our national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, has the latest for us here.
The White House is walking back a previous denial that prior to the inauguration, the National Security Advisor, former Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, spoke to the Russian ambassador about sanctions imposed by the Obama White House as punishment for Russian interference in the U.S. election. The telephone call in question took place on December 29th, the same day that President Obama struck back at Russia and expelled 35 Russian diplomats. At the time, Flynn told Vice President Mike Pence that he had not spoken about sanctions or the easing of sanctions with Russia's ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. In turn, Vice President Pence denied publicly the Trump team had spoken with the Russian envoy about easing sanctions, which, if true, could have been a violation of the Logan Act, which bars U.S. citizens from interfering with U.S. foreign policy.
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions against Russia or the expulsion of diplomats.
Today, the White House changed its tune about the denial. Flynn, quote, indicated that while he had no recollection of discussing sanctions, he couldn't be certain that the topic never came up. The revised statement came after the Washington Post and multiple news outlets reported the FBI has a transcript of the phone call and that current and former intelligence officials say, according to that transcript, Flynn may have indicated the Trump team would relieve those sanctions once in office.
If they were talking about lifting sanctions, I can tell General Flynn and the Trump administration that there will be a violent reaction in the Congress.
Ranking Democrats on the CIA Oversight Committee have called for the White House to immediately suspend National Security Advisor Flynn and revoke access to classified information until the situation is fully investigated. Sources close to Flynn told me moments ago that he does not remember talking about sanctions with the Russian ambassador. If the conversation about sanctions did occur, Flynn didn't bring it up and made no commitments either way. What concerns them more is this information, which should be classified, is leaking out. In Washington, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
A lot of leaks coming out in the nation's capital. Jennifer Griffin, thank you very much. We're coming right back with much more. Stay with us. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians in the streets of Tehran today to mark the anniversary of the '79 Islamic Revolution. This so-called Day of Rage coming a week after the White House put Iran on notice, issuing new sanctions for test launching a ballistic missile. According to a new report from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Iran has launched 14 ICBMs since the nuclear agreement was signed in 2015. Joining us tonight, retired four-star general, Fox News military analyst, General Jack Keane. General, great to have you with us.
Good to be here, Lou.
The Iranians chanting death to America is nothing new, but the provocative tests of these missiles and the continued rhetoric, is this a signal that we're headed toward, as they styled it, dark days with Iran?
Well, certainly, I think President-elect Trump, now President Trump, has turned the page on Iran. You know, Iranian behavior since 1980 has been pretty stark. They've used their proxies to blow up our embassies, to blow up our barracks, and no Democratic or Republican has ever contested this Iranian behavior. This president, I believe, is going to do just that, because it's the Iranian behavior, much more so than the nuclear deal, which is so troubling in the Middle East, because they want to dominate and control the Middle East. And they've had some real success in Lebanon, Syria, obviously potentially Iraq, and obviously also Yemen. And this provocative behavior, as you indicate, is weakening the alliance between our Sunni Arabs and the United States as they try to humiliate the United States. So this president is saying, no, enough is enough. He's going to begin with sanctions, and he's willing to confront them. It doesn't mean conflict and war, but it does mean we're going to stand up to this kind of aggressive behavior.
Give us your sense, very quickly. I want to turn next to Afghanistan, but very quickly, Iran seems to me, at least, to be playing with fire, because they could have nearly all of their infrastructure leveled in any conflict. In pushing the United States like this, it's just a very stupid thing for them to do. And it is a highly, highly risky strategy on their part. Am I mistaken in that view?
Yes. And here's why. First of all, they're emboldened by the nuclear deal and the $150 billion windfall that they've got. But secondly, This strategy for 36 years has worked, Lou. They have domination control in a number of countries using their proxies, and we've never confronted them. Why wouldn't they continue to do it, regardless of who the new president is? They've dealt with many presidents before. So I think they're going to continue to push until we push back.
And but that's what I'm really asking. It would seem to me the United States, with its advanced weaponry and technology, could eliminate such a huge percentage of their infrastructure. They wouldn't be able to recover from it economically, forget militarily, for decades.
But they don't believe we would ever do that. They're convinced that the United States is not going to go to war with Iran over their behavior in the Middle East, and that's the evidence to date. I think this president is trying to tell them a clear intent. I have capability and I have intent to use it, and you must understand that. That is different.
Let's turn to Afghanistan, and we're apparently at a stalemate, according to the commander of our forces there. A stalemate doesn't sound like a very good place for us to be, given the effort that we have put into Afghanistan over the course of the past 16 years. Rather than go through how we got here, how can we actually start talking about achieving a military objective, a strategic objective in Afghanistan, or should we just simply withdraw?
No, we should not withdraw. It's such a troubled area. This is the area that struck our homeland, and they would do that again if they're able to get a sanctuary going again in Afghanistan. And it is actually a war that's not winnable under current policies. And you put your finger on it. We need a comprehensive strategy to deal with Afghanistan. The fact that there are 2 sanctuaries that the Taliban have in Pakistan, and we have tolerated that through 2 administrations, is absolutely outrageous, because the Pakistan military are helping them. That must stop. And then the commander needs to be told, put together a plan, together with Central Command and the Pentagon, on what is needed in terms of resources to make this commitment once and for all and bring this to an end. Yes, of course, it is winnable if we have the right policies and the right campaign plan in place to deal with this.
All right. General Jack Keane. Jack, thanks for being with us. Good to see you.
Good talking to you, Lou.
Joining us tonight, pastor at First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, Pastor Robert Jeffress. Pastor, great to have you with us. I want to start with this extreme vetting priority. A lot of people saying that the president is putting too much emphasis on this, that it's not right because it does include Muslims. Your thoughts from the perspective of your faith?
Well, first of all, we've done that as a nation in the past. We waited too long, but eventually in the 1940s, we helped persecuted Jewish people from Germany. In 1990, we did it with Soviet Jews who were being persecuted. So we've done this before. And Lou, people say, well, that's unconstitutional to use a religious test for who can and can't come into this country. And that's absolutely wrong. No. The Constitution has nothing to say about a religious test for discrimination. The only time the term religious test is used in the Constitution is in Article 6, referring to who can run for government. But government has a right and responsibility to monitor who does and doesn't come into this country.
Well, I'm smiling, and I'm doing so because the Ninth Circuit Court, those judges didn't have any concern about the Constitution. They didn't refer to the Constitution. No. They didn't refer to the statutes that would limit the authority. I want to take up the pot of Pope Francis today saying this, and I want to quote him exactly, saying, a Christian would never say you will pay for that, referring to the wall. It's one thing when the Pope before has said build bridges and not walls and so forth, even though it's considerably ironic or if outright contradictory since he lives behind walls. But to say a Christian would never say you will pay for that is the Pope intervening in strictly secular political, the politics of this country.
Look, I believe the Pope is sincere. He's just sincerely wrong about this. And as I read his rationale for it, he said, well, the Bible says we're not to return evil for evil. We're to overcome evil with good and not seek revenge. He was quoting from Romans chapter 12 about individual Christians. But in the very next chapter, Paul says government is to seek revenge against those who practice evil. It is supposed to protect its citizens. And what I appreciate about President Trump is he is is absolutely determined to fulfill his God-given responsibility to protect this nation.
Pastor, as always, instructive and illuminating. We appreciate it, and always good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lou.
Pastor Robert Jeffress. Up next, President Trump promises a big announcement on taxes and tax cuts very soon. Stay with us.
We are in the process right now of working on a major tax reform that will massively reduce taxes on our workers and businesses. We want to make it much easier to do business in America, and that's what we're going to do.
In our online poll, we asked you last night, do you believe the Supreme Court is capable of making an honest, fair, politically neutral judgment of the president's executive order? As you see there, 66% of you said no. That is our modern politicized judiciary. Joining me now, radio talk show host, Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. Tammy, good to have you with us. National Affairs columnist at National Review, John Fund. John, good to have you with us. Tammy, this is laid bare for all the world now to see, but particularly Americans, that our judiciary system is as politicized as any other part of this government.
Yes, and what you've done earlier with the numbers of how many judges, how they've been appointed, these are things that no one really knows. We know there's no more civics, really, in high school, right? This has been, and it's already been a civics lesson. It has the potential of being an even better one with information like with what you've provided this evening. But what it also shows is that really, even as Judge Gorsuch noted in his acceptance remarks for the nomination, is that judges are lawyers in robes. Yeah. And they come with this kind of bias. And clearly something has to be done. It has to be changed.
And Judge Gorsuch making that crack, which was just as insulting to a man to whom he owes a great deal as it could be, to say it's disheartening to see criticism of the high court. I mean, that is an elitist, extraordinary view to hold, and a terrible miscalculation by a man who is obviously smarter than that.
I grant you that all of what you just said is true. It doesn't. Well,
then we have nothing further to discuss.
Oh no, but it doesn't change what
he surrenders.
Doesn't change the mistakes the administration made. If you wave a red cape in front of a mad judge, you're going to get the kind of result you saw last night, where a George.
Oh, you don't think? Oh, come on, John. You don't think that there would have been a dime's worth of difference in what that court did, irrespective of what the president said?
Lawyers are surprised it was 3-0. Lawyers were surprised that the George W. Bush appointee joined in. I think the fact that the opinion, as badly as it was written, was so against the administration was because the administration has been attacking judges.
I think that the reason they're looking for an en-banc hearing now is because at least one judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals knows they made a farce of themselves. They absolutely a mockery.
I've looked at the numbers. They have an en-banc hearing. They're going to lose that too. Trump should regroup, rewrite the executive order, and reissue it.
Trying for that circuit to recover some semblance.
The way to do that is to break up the Ninth Circuit, which is there's a move in Congress
All you'll
to do
have
it.
is two of the same.
No, you'll have one
conservative. It's like snakes, John. That's the way it works.
Excuse me, Idaho and Arizona. I think they're going to be a conservative circuit.
I don't know why people would be surprised
they're
at the
not
Bush.
appointed out of.
Yes, they are appointed out of those states. Each state appoints its own judges in that appeals court.
Let me be clear. They do not depend on the state for who puts them into the court.
There are a certain number of seats for each state.
They have to be referred by their senators, but that's...
But let's remember, though, too, with George W. Bush, it was his appointee in Washington that started this.
It wasn't really his appointee. That was a liberal judge. That was a trade-off for a power deal by the liberal senator.
Here's what we know.
It was not his appointee.
Tammy's right. It does go down as his appointee.
It's been manipulated into that.
But the fact of the matter is that we now have a man in the presidency who we have to make sure appoints genuinely conservative individuals.
Say we shouldn't take this too seriously?
But also, there's so many open seats. Trump has got to make sure that that's one of his priorities of filling those seats, because we know now the
fact of the matter is we have a circuit court in this country, and liberals control 70% of those circuits. Democrats control them and influence the left, I think, controls them is another way to put it better. And we have a huge problem here. The left is antagonistic toward its own country, toward its own values, its traditions, and its history, and its people. This is a major, major problem.
And this is another irony, that the argument that you can't critique the judiciary. It's coming from the same people who are critiquing the President of the United States in obscene ways 24/7. But even the commentators, everyone else, is somehow the judiciary is this untouchable thing. They can be critiqued. They should be within the bounds of our being able to have a conversation.
For it, John.
Another way to do this is I think the president should raise term limits for justices. I think it is ridiculous to have lifetime appointments in this age. You can take care of the lifetime issue by they serve 12 years in the Supreme Court, then they go down to an appeals court. They still get their salary. They still get their benefits. We need term limits for judges just like we need them for Congress, and we have them for the president.
Idea. Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, today turned away from a public school that has about half of its students unable to meet any standard on reading or mathematics. That is a disgrace, and it's in the name of Black Lives Matter, funded by in part by George Soros and the left in this country. This is, at what point is enough enough?
Well, it's going to be enough to some degree when we obliterate effectively the Democrat Party in 2018. Americans do not like this, and we're very quiet about it, but we don't like the obstruction or the destruction. This Black Lives Matter groups like Acorn, Occupy, and this is all the left has now, and Americans have rejected it.
A lot of these groups not only get funded from George Soros, private money, foundation money, they also get funded from the federal government, especially through HUD and especially through poverty grants.
Point.
Let's defund these groups. If they're going to suppress free speech and prevent students from being helped, not a single federal dollar should go
That's
there.
what we did with Acorn. It took a defunding, but then they changed their names. We've got to make sure we just cut it off at the root.
That was as awful a scene to see. And by the way, as I said, if the school had had perfect performance and her presence was somehow an intrusion on excellence, it would be one thing. But to consign those kids to another interruption in what should be
and especially in a district where the kids who go to the private and charter schools are doing so much better.
Exactly.
Yeah, as it is nationwide. John Fund, thank you. Tammy Bruce, thank you very much. Good to see you both. That's it for us tonight. We thank you for being with us. And come Monday, Ed Rollins, Michael Goodwin, Michelle Malkin among our guests. Please be with us. For now, have a great weekend. Good night from New York.
We're going to win, win, win. You're going to get so tired of winning. You're going to say, Mr. President, please, please, please. It's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'm going to say,
I don't give a damn. We're going to keep winning 100%. America first. We're going to make America great again. Make America great again. Make America great again. Make America great again.
I'm sorry. We're going to keep winning because we're going to make America great again.
Make America great again.
We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more. We're going to win so much.
Good evening, I'm Chris Wallace in for Bret Baier. It must have been nice for President Trump to see a friendly face this morning. Japan's prime minister, who was the only world leader to meet with Mr. Trump before his inauguration, showed up at the White House today. The president was still stinging from his judicial rebuke last night, upholding the suspension of his immigration executive order. But he made it clear this afternoon this fight is far from over. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts begins our coverage tonight. Good evening, John.
Chris, good evening to you. Another busy day here at the White House as the president and his team try to formulate a plan to save his extreme vetting executive order. At the same time, there were hundreds of people at the White House for another visit of a foreign leader. At the White House today, a warm embrace for Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, not long after President Trump took a flamethrower to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on Twitter, calling their ruling last night, quote, a disgraceful decision.
Thank you very much.
And at a press conference with Abe, the president pledging he will not let the courts deter him from his prime directive to keep the nation safe.
We are going to keep our country safe. We are going to do whatever is necessary to keep our country safe.
Sources say the White House may give up on the idea of lifting the temporary restraining order against the immigration ban and may not appeal the case to the Supreme Court. Instead, the White House will focus on fighting to prove the constitutionality of the ban in federal district court in Seattle.
We'll be doing something very rapidly having to do with additional security for our country. You'll be seeing that sometime next week. In addition, we will continue to go through the court process, and ultimately I have no doubt that we'll win that particular case.
The White House is also weighing the option of writing a new executive order that would create specific carve-outs for legal permanent residents and possibly visa holders already in the country that would allow them to come and go. And there are other executive orders in the works, including one that would keep the detention center at Guantanamo Bay open indefinitely. But the president appears confident he can put in place strict measures to screen immigrants.
I feel totally confident that we will have tremendous security for the people of the United States. We will be extreme vetting, which is a term that I developed early in my campaign because I saw what was happening.
The court case was a distraction as the president welcomed his second foreign leader to the White House. Security and trade were at the top of the agenda for the meeting with Shinzo Abe. President Trump making a veiled reference to one of his pet peeves, America's $70 billion trade deficit with Japan.
On the economy, we will seek a trading relationship that is free, fair, and reciprocal, benefiting both of our countries.
Abe, who spent the past 30 years in government and politics, praised President Trump's uphill battle to win the election.
This is the dynamism of democracy. I would like to celebrate and congratulate Donald for being sworn in as the president.
The president reciprocated, saying after their meeting at Trump Tower in November, the two had become fast friends. The president offering Abe the rare opportunity to travel with him aboard Marine One, then Air Force One, for a working weekend getaway at the president's Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. The two leaders will conduct much of their diplomacy on the golf course after the two of them met back in November. Shinzo Abe said that he would love to come back and play golf with President Trump. So the two of them will get together for 2 rounds of golf this weekend. There will be a lot of golf course diplomacy. 1 round at the Trump National Course on Jupiter Island, another one out at the Trump International Course in West Palm Beach. And we're just hearing another development now in this whole case of the temporary restraining order. One judge from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has asked the court to vote on whether or not the temporary restraining order should be voted on, or at least heard by the court en banc. That would be an 11-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They have asked both parties, that would be Washington State and Minnesota, and the White House, to submit briefs on whether or not this should be heard. So, Chris, this thing keeps developing moment by moment.
John, and in a news cycle that never ends, I understand that President Trump is still talking about voter fraud in the November election. What can you tell us about that?
The other day, he had a group of senators, including a number of Democrats, over to the White House for a session on discussing the Supreme Court nominee, Judge Neil Gorsuch. Kelly Ayotte, the former senator from New Hampshire, who lost her bid for another term back in November, is shepherding Gorsuch around on Capitol Hill. She was here at the White House, and according to sources, the president said she would have won her seat in New Hampshire again had people not voted illegally from out of state. So the president keeping this controversy alive. We still haven't heard yet about an investigation being launched into registration voter fraud, but we should hear that soon now that Senator Jeff Sessions has been sworn in as the Attorney General. They were waiting for that, so I imagine an executive order on that front coming down soon. Chris?
John Roberts reporting on another very busy day in the Trump White House. John, thank you. One other problem that President Trump is facing in his early days on the job is a flood of leaks from within his own administration. Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, is here to talk about that tonight. Howie, are these leaks just embarrassing, or are some of them doing serious damage to the president and his team?
Chris, they are taking a toll. The Washington Post reported today that National Security Advisor Michael Flynn discussed U.S. sanctions with the Russian ambassador before President Trump took office, quote, interpreted by some senior U.S. officials as inappropriate and potentially illegal. Yesterday, Reuters quoted unnamed sources as saying that when Trump spoke to Vladimir Putin and the Russian leader raised the question of extending the New START treaty, quoting the article, Trump paused reporters to ask his aides in an aside what the treaty was. Now, such information is so closely held, it's clear that some senior officials are deliberately trying to embarrass this president.
It seems that many of these leaks are not only targeting the president, but also top White House officials.
Well, take Sean Spicer after Melissa McCarthy played him as a hothead on Saturday Night Live, and the president did not like that. There were a spate of stories questioning whether he might be in trouble, which is mainly overheated speculation. A White House official tells me President Trump has given his press secretary positive feedback after some of his briefings. Now, some of this, Chris, is being fueled by the search for a communications director, but it was always a bit crazy for Spicer to be doing both jobs.
Who else has been on the receiving end?
Oh, you had a gusher of leaks about Steve Bannon supposedly wielding too much influence, and Reince Priebus trying to reassert control, and Michael Flynn allegedly annoying the president, and others questioning the clout of Jared Kushner. Many of these staff infighting stories seem to be driven by, let's say, conflicting agendas.
You know, and you and I have been around this town quite a while, there are leaks inside every White House. Does it seem, and of course we've only 3 weeks into this presidency, to be a bigger problem inside the Trump White House?
Sure, these leaks are par for the course, but they're usually authorized leaks that make the president look good. A front-page piece in the New York Times this week, which Trump dismissed as fiction, painted him as a lonely figure, with one telling detail about him wandering around at night in his bathrobe. That went viral when Spicer, in denouncing the story, said the president didn't wear a bathrobe, and now you have some outlets digging up pictures of him in bathrobes from decades ago. So, Chris, some of this descends to the level of silliness.
Howie, I'm going to keep you here because we are awaiting a feed. Talking about a news cycle that never ends, President Trump, we saw in John Roberts' report, was on Air Force One. He apparently took his wife Melania on a tour because she had never been on Air Force One. So he was taking her on a tour of the plane. It's pretty impressive, having been on it once myself. Took her all the way back to the rear of the plane, which is where the press sits, and basically conducted a press conference, a mini press conference about a number of the issues that came up in his press conference with Prime Minister Abe and that have come up on a number of other issues over the last few days. We are awaiting that feed. We think it's going to come in just a matter of moments. What your thoughts about that as we wait for this feed of a press gaggle that went on board Air Force One just a short time ago?
You know what struck me, Chris, is that in his press availability with the Japanese Prime Minister, Trump seemed diplomatic, unusually restrained, as he was with Theresa May. And so I had the feeling that he had more to say about some of these issues. So, of course, next opportunity he gets, he's on the plane, doesn't usually talk to reporters, but did in this case. And I think particularly he wanted to address this question of the decision, perhaps, not to appeal the appellate ruling on the travel ban.
All right. Again, we are awaiting a feed. This was coming off Air Force One. The president landed in Florida just a short time ago. Here is the president and the First Lady.
Are you comfortable? Some what?
Some of what you said at the press conference.
Sure.
You spoke about you're going to win this court battle against the immigration and travel ban.
We'll win that battle.
You also talked about
the unfortunate part is it takes time statutorily, so it takes a little time. We'll win that battle. But we also have a lot of other options, including just filing a brand new order on Monday. Could very well be. But I like to keep I'd like to surprise you. We need speed for reasons of security, so it could very well be that we do that.
What are some of the changes that you're looking for?
Very little, just in honor of the decision. We will perhaps do that. We'll see, but on Monday or Tuesday.
You talked about new security measures. Is that separate from potentially writing a new?
We're going to have very, very strong vetting. I call it extreme vetting, and we're going to have very strong security in our country. We are going to have people come into our country that want to be here for good reasons.
What do you think of reports that General Flynn had conversations with the Russians about sanctions before you were sworn in?
I don't know about it. I haven't seen it. What report is that?
There are a number of
The Washington Post is reporting that he talked to the ambassador to Russia before you were inaugurated about sanctions, maybe trying to...
I haven't seen that. I'll look at that.
Mr. President, what is your response to the Iranian president who earlier today told people that any nation that threatens the nation of Iran is going to regret it eventually?
You better be careful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, it was a little difficult to hear all of that, but we had gotten a readout beforehand. Let me briefly recap what President Trump was saying aboard Air Force One after taking that tour with his wife Melania, turning into a mini news conference. He was asked what he is going to do about the executive order, the travel ban. He said they're considering whether to write a new one. He wants to have extreme vetting, also deciding on whether or not he's going to pursue the case in court or just write a new executive order and start from scratch on that. He was asked about a Washington Post report that we're going to tell you about in a few moments, that despite his earlier denials that National Security Advisor Michael Flynn may have talked to the Russian ambassador before they took office in December, just as President Obama was issuing tougher sanctions against Russia because of its interference in the election, that it now turns out that apparently Michael Flynn did talk, despite his earlier denials, to the Russian ambassador about those sanctions. He said he didn't know anything about that. And the last thing that he was asked about were comments by Iranian President Rouhani that Iran would defend itself. And he said they better be careful. So he was firing back at any kind of implied threat from the Iranian president. As I say, you got to be working full time to cover this president. Speaking of which, President Trump's pick to oversee the repeal and replacing of Obamacare is now on the job. Former Congressman Tom Price is sworn in today as Health and Human Services Secretary after an early morning Senate confirmation. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel tells us tonight health care is one of several big challenges for Republicans this year, and the clock is ticking.
Republicans have promised to repeal and replace Obamacare, finish tax reform, and confirm a Supreme Court justice, all big-ticket items when Washington is deeply polarized. Today, President Trump laid out his vision on improving the tax code.
We'll have an incentive-based policy, much more so than we have right now. We're working with Congress, working with Paul Ryan, working with Mitch McConnell. And I think people are going to be very, very impressed.
The ayes are 52, the nays are 47. The nomination is confirmed.
With that, the Senate confirmed the third of 3 cabinet nominees this week, Dr. Tom Price to lead Health and Human Services. And next week, we'll start with an agreement to vote on Steve Mnuchin for Treasury, David Shulkin for Veterans Affairs, and Linda McMahon to head the Small Business Administration.
There is nothing in Mr. Mnuchin's record to suggest that he could stand up to Wall Street.
Some GOP senators are getting frustrated with what they call obstruction.
Friends on the Democratic side of the aisle are trying to slow walk us. I mean, clearly we should have the cabinet in place by now. And under normal circumstances, we would. That would allow us to be back on the legislative calendar.
Among the other deadlines, the debt ceiling due to expire in mid-March, but can have some flexibility. Government funding is due to run out April 28th, so Congress will need to pass another continuing resolution or the 11 remaining 2017 fiscal bills. And then there's reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration, which must be signed into law by the end of September, with another goal of moving toward a next-generation aviation system added to it. And individual members of Congress have their own priorities as well.
There are a lot of things we want to work with the administration on. We want to work with the administration on infrastructure and tax reform. Just 2 examples. I want to work with them on a bilateral trade agreement with the United Kingdom.
The calendar gets even tighter with recesses and work periods when lawmakers are back in their home states. There's also an awareness that if Republicans falter, Democrats will be ready to pounce.
The midterm election of the incoming president and his party doesn't traditionally fare well for them. So there's a lot for us to be excited about looking forward.
House Speaker Paul Ryan has called one-party control a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But that does not mean it is easy. Chris?
Mike Emanuel reporting from Capitol Hill. Mike, thanks. Let's take a closer look now at some of the challenges President Trump faces in pushing his policy agenda. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Trish Regan in New York on what Trump tax reform might look like. But first, Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron and the hurry-up on Obamacare. Good evening, Carl.
Hi, Chris. Well, this really is a milestone. The Trump administration has a new leader in their push to dismantle the Affordable Care Act.
Congratulations.
After the new Health and Human Services Secretary, Tom Price, was sworn in by the Vice President, the President suggested the repeal and replacement of Obamacare is accelerating.
We finally have our secretary, and now we get down to the final strokes.
Secretary Price has a colossal task ahead. During his confirmation hearings, he made these two promises.
What I commit to, Senator, is working with you and every single member of Congress to make certain that we have the highest quality health care and that every single American has access to affordable coverage. We will commit to making certain that they don't lose coverage under whatever replacement plan comes forward.
As a Republican congressman, Price, a physician, was one of many to author a replacement health care plan. So far, his former House colleagues have failed to find a consensus. Nonetheless, House Speaker Paul Ryan has also indicated another big step will come in less than 7 weeks.
We want to be moving our Obamacare legislation by the end of the first quarter.
The president's indicated a final replacement may not be fully implemented till next year. Some GOP senators have argued no repeal should advance without a simultaneous and superior replacement.
No one's talking about repealing anything until there is a concrete, practical alternative to offer Americans in its place.
A huge part of the looming Obamacare replacement revolves around Medicare and Medicaid. As a candidate, President Trump endorsed block granting Medicaid to the states so services could be tailored at a more local level. As a congressman, Price backed that idea too. Democrats say block granting Medicaid to the states is a dangerous abdication of a federal responsibility, and during his confirmation hearings, Price had an answer for that too.
Our commitment is to make it so that they have that coverage or greater.
That's a commitment you're making.
That's a commitment.
The last piece of the Trump administration health care team will be the confirmation of Seema Verda to head the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Her confirmation hearing is next week.
In pushing Obamacare, the last president's commitments that health care would be cheaper and if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor were not kept. Republicans are intensely aware of that and struggling not to overpromise nor underdeliver. Chris.
Carl, thank you. And then there's what we can expect from the president's self-described big league tax reform. Fox Business Network's Trish Regan is in New York tonight. And Trish, I want to talk to you because there has been some fear in the markets that tax cuts could take a backseat to other issues like immigration. And does the market believe that President Trump will follow through on his promise to lower taxes at both the corporate and the individual level? I bring this up because markets clearly love this idea this week. Record closes all around today. The Dow gained 97. The S&P 500 was up 8. NASDAQ finished ahead 19 for the week. The Dow was up 1 percentage point. The S&P 500 gained 0.8. NASDAQ jumped 1 1/5. So, Trish, how confident are the markets Trump tax reform is going to happen?
Pretty confident. I would say the markets are very optimistic right now, Chris, which is why you've seen upside, especially over today and yesterday, because Donald Trump has described these tax cuts that should be coming forward in the next 2 or 3 weeks, the plan anyway, as, quote, phenomenal, big league, as you mentioned. And so there's a hope among traders right now that it really will surface. In other words, you will see something significant. They've wanted it forever. They have wanted this for a long time. There had been some hope with the Obama administration that at least there would be some agreement among both sides that you could get a corporate tax cut through. It didn't happen, and so now the expectation is that Donald Trump will be able to push this through. A corporate tax cut, an individual tax cut. He's promising the whole shebang here, and Wall Street really wants it.
But that lays out the big question. Trump really wants it. Republicans in Congress really want it. But to get it through the Senate, you're going to need some Democratic buy-in. Will Congress, especially the Democrats in the Senate, follow the president's lead?
It's going to be tough because you're going to have the Elizabeth Warrens out there that are going to say, look, this is just a tax cut that's going to do nothing but enrich corporations and line the pockets of the fat cats that don't need to be lined anymore. So there's definitely going to be political pushback. The other thing to keep in mind here is that you may not see all Republicans fall in line because you have a lot of traditional conservatives that don't like the idea of spending money. And even tax cuts to a certain extent in the here and now are effectively a bit of a spend, right? Because the government's not going to get as much revenue in its pocket immediately. So they're going to be looking for some concessions in terms of other things you can cut from the budget. And right now, Donald Trump, he's really indicated he wants to do some pretty significant spending. I mean, that wall's going to cost a lot of money, Chris. The infrastructure spend that he's looking to enact, that is all going to be rather significant. So when you combine that along with the tax cuts, he may see some political pushback. He's got some work to do.
Trish Regan from Fox Business Network. Trish, thanks so much. Have a good weekend.
You bet. You too.
Up next, why some congressional Republicans are being showered with booze at town hall meetings. The early returns on President Trump are not encouraging for many Republican lawmakers taking a break from D.C. Correspondent Alicia Acuna shows us what happened when one of them met with his constituents.
A town hall meeting went sideways in conservative Utah for fifth-term Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz.
Folks, I get one sentence in.
Jessica Priest, a political science professor at BYU, tried to attend but couldn't get in.
I think it was a combination of things, but I think a number of people were there specifically trying to pressure Jason Chaffetz to put more pressure on Donald Trump.
There is angst in Chaffetz's district, where he was last reelected with almost 3/4 of the vote. Despite his move to seek disciplinary action for Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway after she publicly promoted Ivanka Trump's products, there is concern whether, as chair of the GOP House Oversight Committee, Chaffetz will investigate potentially questionable dealings in the Trump administration.
Some of the things that I've heard, the accusations, don't step over the line.
The town hall took place in reliably Democratic Salt Lake City, a contrast from earlier in the week when Chaffetz met face-to-face with President Trump.
It was an honor to sit with the president. It doesn't happen every day. It's the first time I've ever been in the Oval Office.
The Republican from Utah is not alone in finding crowds and frustration at home. California GOP Congressman Tom McClintock had to be escorted out of a town hall meeting recently. Rowdy protesters furious over his support for President Trump's travel ban.
This country is a long, long way from any kind of kumbaya moment. The intensity, the anger, the outrage, the polarization, the political dysfunction, they're all going to continue.
If all of this looks and sounds familiar, think back to the election of President Obama in 2008. Shortly after came the birth of the Tea Party movement. Furious voters managed to replace some Republicans in Washington with more conservative ones. Chris?
Alicia, thank you. President Trump's national security advisor could be in trouble over a phone call he made before he was on the White House payroll. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin has the latest on what the White House says was discussed in that phone call and why Democrats want an investigation.
The White House is walking back a previous denial that prior to the inauguration, the National Security Advisor, former Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, spoke to the Russian ambassador about sanctions imposed by the Obama White House as punishment for Russian interference in the U.S. election. The telephone call in question took place on December 29th, the same day that President Obama struck back at Russia and expelled 35 Russian diplomats. At the time, Flynn told Vice President Mike Pence that he had not spoken about sanctions or the easing of sanctions with Russia's ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. In turn, Vice President Pence denied publicly the Trump team had spoken with the Russian envoy about easing sanctions, which, if true, could have been a violation of the Logan Act, which bars U.S. citizens from interfering with U.S. foreign policy.
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions against Russia or the expulsion of diplomats.
Today, the White House changed its tune about the denial. Flynn, quote, indicated that while he had no recollection of discussing sanctions, he couldn't be certain that the topic never came up. The revised statement came after the Washington Post and multiple news outlets reported the FBI has a transcript of the phone call, and that current and former intelligence officials say, according to that transcript, Flynn may have indicated the Trump team would relieve those sanctions once in office.
If they were talking about lifting sanctions, I can tell General Flynn and the Trump administration that there will be a violent reaction in the Congress.
Ranking Democrats on the CIA Oversight Committee have called for the White House to immediately suspend National Security Advisor Flynn and revoke access to classified information until the situation is fully investigated. Sources close to Flynn told me moments ago that he does not remember talking about sanctions with the Russian ambassador. If the conversation about sanctions did occur, Flynn didn't bring it up and made no commitments either way. What concerns them more is this information, which should be classified, is leaking out. Chris?
Jennifer, thank you. 4 people are in custody tonight in France, accused of plotting what a top official calls an imminent attack on French soil. 3 men and a 16-year-old girl were taken into custody in southern France. Police uncovered a makeshift laboratory with explosives and other ingredients for making a bomb. One official says it is believed the group was planning a suicide attack, but there is no word yet on a specific target. China was one of candidate Trump's favorite punching bags on the campaign trail, and he set Beijing off balance right after his election. But correspondent Rich Edson reports tonight from the State Department things seem to have been straightened out, at least for now.
In one phone call, President Trump diffused mounting animosity between his administration and China. And all he did was reaffirm a policy the U.S. has employed for more than 40 years.
I had a very, very good conversation, as most of you know, yesterday with the president of China. I think we are on the process of getting along very well.
The White House says, quote, the two leaders discussed numerous topics, and President Trump agreed, at the request of President Xi, to honor our One China policy. That policy, to establish official relations with Communist China, the United States recognized one government for China and Taiwan, the one in Beijing. As recently as December, then President-elect Trump questioned that position.
I fully understand the One China policy, but I don't know why we have to be bound by a One China policy unless we make a deal with China, having to do with other things, including trade.
And as a candidate, Mr. Trump accused China of taking advantage of the United States, unfairly manipulating its currency to boost its exports, and, as its ally, refusing to address an increasingly aggressive North Korea.
When China doesn't want to fix the problem in North Korea, we say, sorry, folks, you got to fix the problem. Because we can't continue to allow China to rape our country.
Now, with assurances the Trump administration will officially recognize only the Chinese government in Beijing, the two countries can begin discussing their differences.
This One China principle has always been the political basis for a sound, healthy China-U.S. bilateral relationship.
Now that the call has been made, that the president reinforced the One China policy, he's cleared out the major issue that the Chinese had with him, and now the Chinese have to respect him and offer something in return.
As there are direct military concerns, as China builds on contested islands in the South China Sea. And the U.S. Navy is also operating in that region, and the day before the two presidents spoke, we're also learning that a Chinese military surveillance aircraft crossed within 1,000 feet of a U.S. Navy reconnaissance plane. The Pentagon says they believe that the incident was unintentional. The White House is also saying that President Trump this afternoon has reaffirmed the administration's commitment to a U.S.-Japanese defense treaty, one that the president made clear also includes disputed islands in the East China Sea. Chris.
Rich Edson reporting from the State Department. Rich, thanks. President Trump vows to keep the country safe despite yesterday's court setback blocking his travel ban. We'll talk it over with the panel when we come right back.
We'll be doing something very rapidly having to do with additional security for our country. You'll be seeing that sometime next week. In addition, we will continue to go through the court process, and ultimately, I have no doubt that we'll win that particular case.
President Trump in a news conference today with Japan's Prime Minister taking a much more subdued tone in reacting to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision last night blocking his travel ban. Time to bring in our panel. Tim Farley of Sirius XM Radio, Matt Schlapp, contributor for The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. So, Matt, let me start with you because I think it's fair to say, I think we were all struck by this, that President Trump was very careful and much more subdued today, saying he's going to take new action next week to protect the homeland, but not telling us what it is, and that he's also going to pursue his legal options in this travel ban case. But there was no talk about so-called judges, no talk about disgraceful rulings. I guess two questions. Your thoughts about his toned-down rhetoric and your thoughts about what it is he may do next week.
Well, I like two parts about it. I like the fact that they're taking their time. He's got a lot of different ways he can go on this travel timeout. And he's going to have a lot of innings in this game to go as well. And on the legal challenge alone, there's several different paths they can take. And what I want to see is this White House have the legal team work with the national security team, the Homeland Security team, and the communications team to really roll out well the next step, because the next step, because this issue, the issue of immigration and terrorism, this is going to be the issue of the Trump presidency, and they got to get it right.
The president seemed to indicate on Air Force One that he may not pursue the case and might just write a new executive order. To some degree, that might seem to be the best way to handle this.
Yeah, or maybe not just appeal this particular ruling, maybe go through the district court level, and maybe eventually this gets solved by the Supreme Court, and maybe, like you're saying, they also come up with additional executive orders. Look, they are going to be on this issue for the next 4 years.
Charles, you said last night as we were covering the ruling as it came in that you thought that the president needed to get off this subject, and in your column today you called his travel ban stupid but legal. So is he taking your advice?
Well, he never does, so it would surprise me if he did this time. The point I wanted to make in the column was there's the moratorium and there's the vetting. The vetting will get 90% support in the country, but they actually should do it. It doesn't depend on a moratorium. The fact is they've lost the case in the most liberal circuit in the country. They've lost it at the district level, and for now the Supreme Court is deadlocked, so it's likely to return. In other words, the case is stacked against him. I happen to think it's legal, but these courts have decided not. So why play a losing hand? What he needs to do, I think, is exactly right. Either rewrite the order or have a new one, so you're dealing on a different playing field. You've gotten essentially the feedback of the Ninth Circuit, so you know what will pass muster, what won't. For example, from the beginning, you exclude the holders of green cards. And then what you do is you slow walk the appeals case and you fast walk the nomination of Gorsuch. There's no hurry on appealing this ruling. They are not going to win it in the end. Put out something else, accelerate the vetting process, announce new procedures. There's a way to keep out people from these 7 countries simply by the vetting process. They essentially have no central government. They have no information. So you can write the vetting process in a way that will honor the moratorium, even without calling a moratorium, and get the other justice on the court so that if it ever gets bumped up to the Supreme Court again, he'll win.
I'm sure they're sitting there in the White House right now taking notes on all this. You did speak a little fast, so they might want to...
That's why they have stenographers.
And they can also just replay the tape. Tim, let me switch subjects on you, and let's turn to Kellyanne Conway, because this continues to be a controversy. Going out on television yesterday from the White House briefing room, counselor to the president, and saying people should go out and buy Ivanka Trump products because some department stores were dropping her lines from the store. Sean Spicer said that she had been counseled. He wouldn't explain what that meant, but within a short time, a couple of hours, Kellyanne Conway was back with Martha McCallum here on Fox News saying that in fact the president supported her and very much was unhappy with any suggestion that she had been counseled. Your thoughts about all of this? Is there an ethics problem in the White House, and if so, do they get it?
I don't know about the ethics problem itself. That would have to be adjudicated by somebody else, and even Jason Chaffetz and Elijah Cummings had signed a note together. This is the chair and the Democratic leader of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and they were critical of what she had done. They wanted to look into it. I think the bigger problem is they don't have a communications director at the White House right now. This is one of the issues for them right now, is that whatever happens, they need to have a message and they need to be able to deliver it consistently. President Trump is de facto the communications director, and he's doing the job and he's doing it badly, which means that whenever anything like this comes up, they should put their heads together. When it came to doing the order, the executive order poorly rolled out, whenever it comes to a lot of the news that they had this week that they wanted to get out there, whether it was the new Intel factory in Chandler, Arizona, whether it was the FAA realignment, whether it was the Dodd-Frank rollout, all of these things got lost in this over-preoccupation with Kellyanne Conway, with tweets about whether or not the Nordstrom deal was a bad one for Ivanka. All of that got lost, and they just need somebody who's saying, look, let's put our heads together, let's try to figure out exactly what message we want to get across.
Well, there may not be a communications director, but there's a lot of communication. Some would say too much, and I want to talk to you about that, Matt. Leaks. I mean, there are always leaks from a White House, and you always get one faction trying to knife the other, quite frankly. But what astonishes me is you are getting leaks of phone calls between President Trump and foreign leaders. We're finding out what President Trump said to the Australian Prime Minister. Now we're finding out what he said to Vladimir Putin.
You always have leaks, you're right, and you always have more junior White House staffers wanting to be in the know with reporters. But the leaks of these conversations, I think, are problematic. I don't know whether that leak is coming from the communications team, but I do think they have to tighten this up. This is not in the best interests of the president nor of his agenda. And look, I think he's had some great foreign policy successes over the course of the last couple of days. I think this weekend the golf summit seems to be going swimmingly. These are positive things, and I think hearing these phone calls characterized, it undermines it, and they need to tighten it up quickly.
Less than a minute, Charles. The thing, I don't think that when you're talking about leaking private phone calls, that sounds to me like it's people in the permanent government who don't approve of this president trying to embarrass him.
Well, you wonder about all the sort of the preliminary stuff involving Trump and the FBI, the CIA, the struggle he had, the battle he had with the intelligence agencies. And I've thought that some of these leaks are a way for the agencies to say, you're messing with the wrong bureaucracy, because we're the keeper of the secrets. I mean, the classic case of that, of course, J. Edgar Hoover. He had something on everybody, so he had a lot of control. But this is, I mean, this is the beginning, this is sort of the feeling out, beginning of the boxing match. But I think that Matt's right. This is really hurting the president. If you can't speak to a foreign leader without having the transcript on the front pages of the papers, then you're really hampered.
Next up, the Friday lightning round.
Lowering the overall tax burden on American business is big league. That's coming along very well. We're way ahead of schedule, I believe, and we're going to be announcing something, I would say, over the next 2 or 3 weeks that will be phenomenal.
President Trump talking up his plan for major business tax reform in a White House meeting yesterday. And we're back now with our panel for the Friday lightning round. Well, Tim, let me start with you. GOP congressional leaders were, to put it mildly, surprised by the president's announcement yesterday. They thought that they were going to be tackling Obamacare, repeal and replace first. Now suddenly tax reform is up on the front burner. What's your sense of the tax reform package that the president might put out there and chances that Congress will pass it?
Well, nobody knows what's in it, obviously, but the problem he's going to have is the Freedom Caucus, because, number one, they don't want to see any increase in spending. He's got like $30 billion increase in military spending, already talking about that, plus the fact that he's got an infrastructure project he'd like to get done. How are you going to do that with the tax reform he's talking about? Devil's in the details. To your point, Affordable Care Act has some tax elements to it. I'm not sure they want to handle any kind of major tax reform unless they get the other things done first.
Matt, the big controversial aspect in the House plan is this border adjustment tax, which taxes imports from other countries. That'll probably be a casualty if they're really to get this bill done. The other thing is, will the tax reform bill be paid for like it was in 1986, or will it not be revenue neutral? And I think the big news could be maybe they're not going to worry so much about whether it's paid for, and that'd be a good thing.
But if you have the big spending and a tax cut that's not paid for,
you have to have economic growth. This is what George Bush 43 realized with his first round of tax cuts. He just didn't get the economic engine going, and he had to go back at it again.
Charles.
This is the one chance for a big bill that could have support on both sides of the aisle. We could have had tax reform, particularly corporate tax reform, under Obama, but he stalled it and he didn't go ahead with it. It could have been done because a lot of Democrats agreed, especially that the corporate tax structure is utterly insane. It's the worst in the world. It creates disincentives, and it is easily fixed. So that, I think, is low-hanging fruit.
The Washington Post had a story today that, contrary to previous denials, the National Security Advisor, retired General Michael Flynn, did in fact discuss sanctions in his conversations last December before he was in office with the Russian ambassador, just at the time that President Obama was imposing sanctions on Russia for its involvement in the election. General Flynn had flatly denied it, and so too, relying on him, did Vice President Pence. Here he is.
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions against Russia or the expulsion of diplomats.
But now Flynn says he can't be sure that the subject didn't come up. Tim, how big a deal is this?
Channeling Howard Baker, what did he know, when did he know it, what did Michael Flynn know, and what did he say to Mike Pence? And Mike Pence, I can only imagine, would be livid about this if Mike Flynn was lying to him about this. Curious to see what he said. I think there's another problem here, and that is that some Republicans, for example, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and Marco Rubio have introduced legislation to cut back on the president's ability to lessen sanctions on Russia. So this is an issue that could divide Republicans. The relationship with Russia is key moving forward here, and they're going to have to straighten out what's going on at home before they can move further.
Matt, Lindsey Graham said today, if it turns out that Mike Flynn was talking about easing sanctions at a time when President Obama was imposing them, it's going to be trouble.
You know, it's December after the election. The fact that the top advisor to the incoming president was talking to ambassadors and people in foreign governments, I'm okay with. I think the Logan Act charge is ridiculous. I think they always come at folks on this, and I think Mike Flynn has a target on his back, and I think he's a good and honorable man, and he's going to weather the storm.
Charles.
To go back to Watergate analogies, there's a classic case of the cover-up being worse than the crime. There is no crime. If he did it and he lied about it, that's not good. But what did he do? He spoke to the Russians about sanctions. That's his job. He's about to become the head of the NSC. He should be talking to the Russians. Why they wanted to hide it is beyond me. And the Logan Act from 1799 has never, ever been invoked, and it makes no sense whatsoever.
All right, we are beginning to run out of time, so I want a lightning round. Today, President Trump made a pivot to Asia. He met with the Prime Minister of Japan, spending the weekend with him, but perhaps more importantly, he finally talked for the first time since he became president with Chinese President Xi and backed off his equivocation on whether or not we would honor one China policy. How serious is this?
And the question is, what did he get for it, if anything, because if he got an acknowledgement that they're going to help with North Korea, but other than that, he needs to get something going with Japan and other countries, because without the TPP, which he's already said he's undoing, then a lot of these countries might turn to Japan. But that is the question, is what was in return, if anything, in his conversation with President Xi Jinping to acknowledge the one China policy.
Matt?
A great week. Avoided a trade war with China. Relations are thawing, and a very important visit with our most important ally in the region. A great week.
If he's expecting a reward from China for reaffirming a policy that's been unchanged for half a century, then he's barking up the wrong tree. I think simply playing golf with the leader of Japan is enough to send a message to the Chinese. We've got allies in the region, and we're going to watch you carefully. And you better watch out when you militarize the South China Sea. We've got allies.
But you don't think that he got any kind of concession in return for acknowledging a policy? When he talked to me in December, right after he'd had the conversation with the Taiwanese president, indicate he was going to use this as a bargaining chip.
He doesn't have a leg to bargain on. If there were alterations in the balance of power, if we were stronger and the Chinese were weaker on the ground, in the sea, then we could impose to threaten a change in the one China policy. But the reverse has happened. The Chinese have tremendous military capacities. Ours have declined. We're in no position to dictate a change. So there was nothing offered to the Chinese, nothing given away, because we didn't have the power to do it.
Next up, the panel picks its winners and losers for this week. And we're back now with our panel to get their winners and losers of this very busy week. Tim, start us off.
Actually, in a counterintuitive way, I actually believe that it was a winning week for Donald Trump, and I would say he's the winner. Why? Because they got 3 cabinet members passed, including one that required a tie-breaking vote. He got some executive orders taken care of that didn't get challenged. And in the Ninth Circuit Court, God forbid something happens, but he has cover in case something does happen, because he can say, I tried to keep the country safe.
And you're a loser.
The loser is the Democratic Party. Their retreat was exactly that. They are united in opposition, but they are not united in any kind of a strategy to move forward. They're moving more toward the left, which I think will damage them as they move forward. They were more to the center when they had control in 2009. They are moving in a direction that's not going to be helpful right now.
Matt.
The winner, Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society, for their brilliant approach to Trump's Supreme Court list and the rollout of Neil Gorsuch.
And your loser?
My loser? Harry Reid. Only Harry Reid could have delivered the most conservative cabinet in 50 years, because it only takes a simple majority to get these folks through. And thank you, Harry Reid, for Tom Price.
We should note, for all the talk about the nuclear option, it was Harry Reid who did it in 2013 for cabinet picks. Charles, winner.
It's been a stressful week, so this is the all-animal winner and losers. The winner of the week is Sonny the red panda, who escaped from the Norfolk, Virginia Zoo and has been living in freedom for 2.5 weeks. The loser, and I say this with sadness, is Ollie the bobcat, who escaped from the National Zoo in D.C. and showed up 2.5 days later looking rather sheepish.
A warm and fuzzy winner and loser.
Turned herself in.
That's special report for tonight. I'm Chris Wallace in Washington. Join me this weekend for Fox News Sunday when I'll sit down with Trump's senior policy advisor, Stephen Miller, to discuss the president's agenda. I'll also talk with the top Democrat.
If we fall for, you know, a bunch of bing bing pong 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 sounds provocative, tweets funny, sounds provocative, tweets funny, sounds provocative, tweets funny, sounds provocative, tweets funny, sounds provocative,
Pocahontas.
Bing bing.
No, she's got this goofy friend. She's a basket case. Donald Trump. Oh boy, Goofus.
Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Trump's education secretary has been at her post for all of 3 days, but protesters are already using harassment to keep her from doing her job. We'll find out what's setting them off. Plus, we'll talk to a professor with a novel idea for fixing poverty in this country: give everyone a government job. But first, last week at NYU, rioters shut down a planned speech by Vice co-founder Gavin McInnes. Now, one student there is saying the speech's organizers ought to be punished for this provocation. In a piece written for Washington Square News, that's NYU's student newspaper, grad student Kuras Esmaili says the college Republicans ought to be kicked off campus for inviting McInnes to speak there. McInnes's beliefs, he says, quote, are beyond our sense of democratic values and debate, and therefore ought to be suppressed. Kuras Esmaili joins us tonight from New York. Mr. Esmaili, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker, for having me.
So, because this is kind of the crux of your argument, I want you to be a little more specific for us, if you could. You said that McInnes's point of view is, and I'm quote, beyond our sense of democratic values. What democratic values specifically are you referring to?
First of all, Tucker, I want to thank you very much for having me on. The reason I accepted to come on here is because what I wrote was actually altered and suppressed by the student paper, and I wrote them and they never wrote me back, but it really gave me a sense that I really need to have somewhere to where I can actually say what I believe rather than an editorial that actually decides to tell me, change my words. So I really appreciate the fact that you have me on and you're allowing me to sort of say it from my perspective.
We always do.
And I did some research on you today, and I really understand that you're a free speech fundamentalist. You believe free speech should be open and it should not be curbed at any point. Am I right about that?
I'm an American, but I'm trying to get to the core of your argument, which is...
see, my argument was suppressed, so I want to sort of be able to sort of say
tell us, then let's just make this really simple for our viewers who don't know the backstory here. Your op-ed that you wrote for this paper appears to suggest the Republicans at NYU should be sanctioned in some way for daring to have Gavin McInnes on campus, and your justification for that is that his views are so beyond the pale, beyond, as you put it, our democratic values,
that we shouldn't be allowed to hear them.
See, Tucker, what I really don't want you to do is do what the student paper at NYU did, which is put words in my mouth and change my words.
Let's
let me sort of tell my own story. Is that okay?
Yes,
so,
with haste.
So what I'm trying to, one of the sentences that was actually taken out, which made me very angry, was the question: does the university, is it obliged to protect the speech of someone who comes on campus and advocates and recruits for Al-Qaeda?
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I don't know that is at question here. We're talking about Gavin McInnes.
It's exactly the question that I want to raise, which was suppressed. So I'm bringing that question. Another question that was altered is the question: should the university protect someone who comes on campus and advocates vigilante violence against police officers who've killed civilians and have not been indicted? Is that protected? Should that be protected on campus?
That was, I mean, look.
That was suppressed on, by those editors. And I want a place where I can sort of have this conversation. What do you think about this? Should someone who actually advocates killing police officers be allowed to debate on a campus, or no, not even debate, to sort of come on and say what they believe on campus?
If you are asking me a question, then let me answer
it.
This is not a question for college administrators to decide. It's been decided by the Supreme Court in a case called Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969, the last big free speech case. And the upshot of it is that advocating violence is indeed protected speech. And of course, politicians do it all the time. We ought to bomb this country or bomb that country. Advocating violence, that's protected by the First Amendment. What is not protected is inciting violence, imminent violence, destruction, or mayhem. I cannot say, go smash the windows of that liquor store. So here's my point. Anything Gavin McInnes conceivably said or would have said on your campus is protected speech. Now, if you'd taken 10 minutes to Google this, you'd know that. And so there's really not a close call here. What he's doing is protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. So for you to say that people should be sanctioned,
do you think people should recruit for Al-Qaeda on a college campus?
Well, of course, I'm completely against Al-Qaeda.
Okay, do you think they should be protected by administrators on a campus?
I think people ought to be able to express their political views, no matter how repugnant to you or me or anyone else, as long as they, in accordance with the Supreme Court decision from 1969, are not inciting imminent violence. I believe I'm understanding that correctly, and I think that you should. And I think the college administrators should.
I do believe
understand
that. I absolutely do believe that. But I also believe that there are arguments, there are points to be made that are beyond the pale of responsible dialogue.
Okay.
Right?
So,
and I think someone coming and saying we should
name one.
I just did two, both of which were suppressed, that were not allowed to be discussed in that newspaper, and which you have not really answered my question either. My stand is this. Okay, that we do not live in a society in which any speech should or is guaranteed. Okay, so. And I also believe, I was sitting on a subway on the way here, right? And I was sitting on a subway in New York City, and I invite all your listeners to come to and sit in the subway station in New York City, where you sit with a cross-section of humanity that is amazing. And I was wondering, and you know what quote came to my mind? Right? We believe, right, that all men are created equal. This is a founding
You're starting to lose me. You're starting to lose me here, Mr. Ismaili.
Let me get to it. We believe that all men are created equal. When someone likens people of color to monkeys, that resonates for some people to be beyond the pale of acceptable American values, right? Because if our country is based on the idea that we're all equal, then you cannot, right, have an argument about whether some people are below human. That to me is not something that really belongs in a debate on a campus.
You don't like it, and I don't either, and I think that's an awful sentiment, and I would never defend it. And yet both of us are bound as Americans to defend the right of people to express views that we disagree with, even if we consider them repugnant or wrong. If they are short of inciting imminent violence, we have to say, I disagree with you, here's the counter case, here's why you're wrong, here's why you shouldn't say things like that. But we cannot prevent people from expressing what they believe. That is the essence of our democratic values, the ones you appealed to, and you don't seem to understand that.
So you would stand up for someone who actually wants to recruit for an organization that has said they want to hurt the United States. You would stand up for the right of that person to speak on a college campus. College campuses are not American society. College campuses are specific places where people are debating and talking to each other.
They're debating, except when they disagree with you, in which case you write them out of the protection by saying they're somehow beyond the pale. Now, I'm asked you clearly, what about Gavin McInnes's positions is so far outside the mainstream that it doesn't fall under the First Amendment?
Calling an African American a monkey, that should be on the outside of a sane debate.
Okay.
All right.
I'm not saying
and the point is that if someone like that,
so you're saying,
and the point that I made in the editorial is the Republican students need to bring conservative ideas onto campus. We need to know why there should be the deregulation of Wall Street. We need to have a discussion about why there should be deregulation of environmental regulations.
Are you a conservative? Why is it up to you to decide what conservative ideas are?
I believe in real discussion.
But only within your
terms. But the Republican students, instead of bringing that question on campus, they bring someone outside of the pale of any rational discussion who calls,
so I wonder, I'm gonna do
an African American a monkey.
Okay,
that's
first
what
of
the
all,
Republican
you
students
keep
bring on
alleging
campus.
that. Hold on, wait, stop. I don't want to get into a defense of a specific writer's writings, but I would actually challenge you to cite chapter and verse on that. I don't believe he actually said that. If he did, obviously I find that repugnant.
There's a link. I put the link where I got that information. There is a link. I mean, listen, you're asking me for chapter and verse. Is a link to him speaking where he likens an actress, a black American actress, to a monkey.
Well, there's literally no chance
people,
I would defend something like that. But the point is, I would defend the right of anybody to say something I disagree with, and you ought to too, and especially as a college student, and I think you're still a college student.
I'm a graduate student, and I actually
You're
teach.
a graduate student, you teach, then you're in a world that was created specifically to protect people who have non-mainstream opinions.
But that space does not protect everybody. Let's be clear about that.
Apparently it doesn't. It doesn't protect people you disagree with.
Does it protect people who advocate killing cops? Do you think that will go well? If someone wanted to go and speak on a college campus,
first of all,
a tour that said that talked
the time.
Really? I really want to know. I really want to know where there's anybody.
Have you been to a Black Lives Matter protest?
Absolutely not. I support Black Lives Matter. I would never support Black Lives Matter if they advocated killing a police officer.
Really?
And they do not.
I wish we had the tape. We've only played it like 5
That is a distortion.
Okay, but
right. So that doesn't have the point being that your la-la land of college campuses being open to everybody to say whatever they want doesn't exist because we have a criteria, right? We believe for 200 years that all men are created equal.
Well,
let me finish this thought.
Yeah.
Okay. People who come out and say, some people aren't equal. Women are inferior when it comes to this. Blacks are inferior when it comes to that. Muslims are inferior because people who say that they go against the grain of a lot of people who get very angry at that. Right?
Yeah, people get angry. That's right. And maybe they should get angry.
And
but
that
that's
inflames. That inflames. That takes us outside of a rational discussion.
Okay.
Right?
So when people
Republican students, if they want to have a rational discussion on campus, they should have us talk about something that matters.
Okay.
Right? Not bring some Yahoo.
Wait, stop, Mr. Ismaili. Can I ask you one last question? We're almost out of time. If I want to know what the new rules are, as created by you, the graduate student, what are the rules for, as you said, rational conversation?
I don't pretend to create rules.
So where can I go on the internet to find out what speech is protected and what speech isn't protected, according to you and your friends at NYU? Is there a website
We don't
that tells
make
me?
rules. I don't pretend to make rules,
you keep
and I don't want to be in a position of being administrator of a college. I think it's a very difficult job. That's not what I want to do.
Okay,
but
how do I know what the rules are?
Administrators, right, are responsible for the safety of their students on campus. Right, and when someone comes and advocates for the idea, the racist ideas, right, it can hurt people, right?
Okay,
and the example that I used in my op-ed that you bring up is 2 weeks ago, some guy walks into a mosque, kills 6 people, right? After he heard, and this is documented, after he heard the speech of a far-right politician. Right. So words actually have effect. Right.
So if I were to go to a rally and people said, I'm just pulling this out of thin air, pigs in a blanket fry like bacon about police officers advocating the killing of cops. I mean, you would say that's unacceptable. That should not be allowed. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if student group wants to have a discussion about police brutality or racism.
If they were to use that phrase, pigs in a blanket fry like bacon.
I'm not interested in the phrase. I'm not going to debate you over this phrase should be allowed or not.
Because you have no principles. That's why. Because all the things you've been saying for the last 11 minutes are totally untrue.
And I came here because I thought I would get the same respect from you.
You just revealed who you are.
Well,
okay. Thanks a lot for joining us. No, you shut it down. Well, if you've been awake at any point in the last 50 years, you know that American colleges are basically pretty liberal. But in the past 5 years or so, campuses seem to have been hit by a fever they haven't experienced since the 1960s. Instead of focusing on professional skills or the sweet treats of scholarship, millions of students and professors have made far-left politics their only reason for being at school. The result is this: everybody gets a safe space except white men. They are hated and despised. What is this about exactly? Scott Greer is the author of a new book that considers it. It's called No Campus for White Men, and he joins us in the studio. Scott, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So the hysteria level's rising. That's not my imagination. I went to college at one point. It wasn't like this. What's changed?
Well, what's changed is that over the last 5 years, and it actually extends longer to that, but it's really gravitated toward in the last 5 years, is that identity politics and victimhood culture have taken over higher education. Basically, with the 2 points is identity politics stress that basically all a person should care about is their own narrow group interests and the identity they ascribe to themselves, such as if I'm an African-American man, that's all my politics, and I only care about furthering the interests of my specific group, African-Americans.
Right.
And that's become dominant on campus because they encourage it through affirmative action and other procedures that encourages people to gravitate towards specific identities for more benefit. And then second, and more important is, in some ways, is victimhood culture, where everybody kind of competes to be the biggest victim. And a lot of people are like, well, why are all these young people trying to pretend to be victims? Nobody wants to be a victim, but the reason why they do that is because we assign moral status in the college moral culture that's being created to who's the bigger victim, who's more oppressed, who's more oppressed gets more status in that moral hierarchy created. And if you're privileged, then that's the worst thing that can happen. And say, like in older moral culture, if you're like demonically possessed, that's the lowest. With this, it's like if you're privileged, that's the worst thing you can be, but being a victim is the best thing you can be. But when your victimhood isn't assigned based on socioeconomic status, you can be the son of a poor coal miner from West Virginia, and you're privileged, and you can be the son of a wealthy multimillionaire, but African-American, and you're oppressed. And that's how the system works.
Now, there's so many ironies in all this. I mean, I guess the first one you sort of noted. I mean, everyone in college is privileged by definition. They're not working for a living. They're learning, which was considered a privilege for like 1,000 years. And the second point is that colleges were designed to be places where people studied universal truths and values rather than narrow and sectarian ones. Why the change? Like, what brought this about? How did it get here?
Well, it is that it wants to pertain to these narrow interests, as I write in No Campus for White Men. It's about building. It's about It's about trying to get to the right views of these people. Right. It's trying to, if you have a narrow identity politics, if that's the core being of the political message on campus, everything is designed to please that type of system. So when you have an English course, the fact that Shakespeare and John Milton are the primary writers that are studying that course, that's a problem because they're white males. We need to have more diversity there because of identity politics. People are like, well, I feel left out because I'm reading Shakespeare or John Milton, even though they forget the universal message in those works, right, and the message and the great writing. They instead, well, we need to have somebody that reflects this current campus culture that we have. So that's why they kind of they push these type of things on college campus.
You know, I believe everything you say. I don't fully understand the psychology behind it or where it came from, but here's what I know for sure. It doesn't make you happy. We have a video from Yale. I think this is one of the exchanges that precipitated your book, that inspired you to write this. But it's also an expression of deep unhappiness. I mean, what was that about?
Absolutely. And that, as you said, that inspired No Campus for White Men. That was about because the professor who was defending himself, who was surrounded and kind of undergoing an inquisition, his wife wrote a simple column saying, look, you shouldn't get all bent out of shape about cultural appropriating Halloween costumes. We know how terrible those can be. I mean, that's a real horror in our society if somebody dresses up in a Halloween costume that's considered cultural appropriation. And she merely said, like, look, you're college kids, you're going to do stupid things, just let it be, don't get out of shape about it. But that was like the worst thing that ever happened on this campus. It was like somebody wrote this horrific racist letter to the newspaper. That's how students treated it. And they took out all their anger upon this poor professor, who's actually a liberal himself, who actually sympathized with their cause, but they wouldn't even let him get his viewpoint heard. They just screamed at him and vented their anger. And it was all kind of this ritual humiliation that he was undergoing. And it was really quite shocking when it happened. And that's why it caught the national eye.
It's just so bizarre. Standing on this bucolic, leafy campus in New England fall, 60 grand a year, none of them have jobs, and they're angry. It's so weird. No Campus for White Men is the book. Scott Greer is the author. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, Democrats have been invoking the name of Coretta Scott King a lot this week after Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts used a letter that King wrote years ago to suggest that Attorney General Jeff Sessions is a bigot. But Mrs. King wrote another letter back in 1991, one you probably haven't heard a lot about. At the time, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah was trying to repeal sanctions placed on employers who hired illegal aliens. Such a move, King warned, would have, quote, a devastating impact on less skilled African-American workers. Mrs. King went on to say the presence of illegal aliens in the workplace would cause, quote, the revival of the pre-1965 discrimination against black and brown U.S. and documented workers in favor of cheap labor, the undocumented workers. Truer words were never spoken or more prescient, but somehow no Democrat has been racing to read that letter. Well, the ACLU, the American Federation of Teachers, and other enthusiastic defenders of legal abortion have denounced Betsy DeVos, the new Secretary of Education, as, ironically, harmful to the nation's children. One of the most common criticisms of DeVos is that she has no familiarity with public schools. And that did not improve today, as a mass of protesters prevented her from visiting a public school here in Washington and possibly assaulted her. What has made these protesters so mad that they'll attack DeVos on her third day? Joined now by Douglas Harris. He's an economics professor at Tulane University in New Orleans. Professor Harris, thanks a lot for coming on. What do you make of that?
Tucker, thanks for having me back. Well, I think the incident today was unfortunate, and I don't think really represents most of the protests. Certainly there's been a lot of opposition to her, but I think most of it's been pretty peaceful, and I think most of it will continue to be. But I do think it's worth thinking about where it's coming from, why the opposition has been so strong, and why the Senate Democrats went to such lengths to try to stop her. My own take on it from the beginning has been that it is about her ideas, and the idea that a free market in schooling is the best thing for students in the long term. Right. I think that's my take on it. I think the reasons why the opposition have been so strong, I think, are a lot broader than that. I think if you wanted to come up with a resume of things that you probably don't want to see in a Secretary of Education, that's kind of what her resume looks like: the conflicts of interest, the lack of experience in schools, the comments about public schooling as being a dead end. Not having the experience, and then having educators who take their jobs very seriously. They're very passionate about their jobs. I think that's one thing you can see from the last couple of weeks. And then to have somebody with that resume come in and be deemed the education leader for the country is tough on folks.
Right. Well, they're too passionate about the jobs. Saving their jobs is their main concern in a lot of cases. I sent a child to public school here in D.C., and I can tell you that some of the teachers put as their primary interest saving their jobs rather than educating the kids. But look, you can have a fair debate. You and I have had a fair debate, and an interesting one, and I agreed with some of the things you said about the ideas that Betsy DeVos has about reforming education. But to attack her personally and to say she doesn't care about kids, doesn't care about schools, when she spent like $20 million just to be nice, just not on her own kids, but on other people's kids. Right. And actually, the school that she and her husband have funded in West Michigan has had great results. I mean, I think by any standard, it's kind of worked. Doesn't mean it's applicable to all schools. But it does mean people ought to give her the benefit of the doubt personally, shouldn't they?
Well, I do think she cares, and I think the reform movement often kind of goes off in these different directions on both sides of people saying they don't care. So on the one side, saying that teachers are just out to keep their jobs. The teachers care about their jobs, yes, but they care about kids. And I think at the other side, I think Betsy DeVos cares about kids. I think that she has their interest in mind. I think we just have very different views about what's in their interest. And I don't think she's looked carefully at the evidence and really looks at it that way to see whether things are working or not. She has a very strong idea of what she wants to do, and she's going to pursue that seemingly against the evidence.
It just seems like in a normal world, people, including teachers, would look at the test results in Washington, D.C., which is where this happened today, and say, this is so outrageous. I mean, I've got the numbers here. You're familiar with them. 12% of D.C. public school students can pass the math standards. 12%. Why aren't they having protests against that? I mean, that really is hurting people, way more than Betsy DeVos could even devise to hurt somebody. But there are no protests about that. Why?
Well, I think they do oppose that, and they have different ideas on what they want to do. So the alternative approach here would be, and I'm not advocating this, but just trying to summarize the position, that we need more early childhood education, and we need to pay teachers higher salaries and more support. Better buildings. Some of the buildings in Detroit are widely publicized to be falling apart.
Do people really think that after what we did in Kansas City, what we've done here in D.C.? I mean, have you seen some of the schools we have here? My daughter went to one. And, they're unbelievable. They're way nicer than any private school here in their physical plant. And yet, the results are spotty at best. I mean, do people really, with a straight face, argue it's a pure funding formula? The more money you put into it, the better result you get? I just don't think there are any data to show that.
No, I don't think that that's what the data show either, but I think there certainly are places where money is an issue, and a lot of what's going on isn't just about the schools either, right? So we have to remember that a lot of the low performance that we're seeing, a lot of that starts and exists when students start the first day of kindergarten, and the schools are trying to catch up from that. So it's not just about the schools, and this is why I think people point to early childhood education as a potential solution, so that they're not so far behind. So I do think that one in particular is a good idea. Do I think that money alone is going to solve this problem within the existing system? No, and that's why my argument hasn't been that we shouldn't do anything differently. It's that we shouldn't go so far in the direction that she's arguing.
Right. Professor, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Up next, more and more people are posting ads for roommates with one peculiar requirement: no Trump supporters allowed. What makes this kind of new segregation better than the old kind? We'll tell you. Plus, in a new poll, a majority of American high school students say offensive speech should not be allowed in public at all. It should be banned. If children are our future, what does it say about our future? We've got details coming up. Well, dozens of people in Washington and around the country are admitting they simply can't bear to live with supporters of the current president. For example, the New York Times reports that a woman called Sahar Khayan was seeking a roommate to fill her $1,300 per month room in Georgetown here in D.C. Her ad read this way: alcohol, pets, and meat products are not allowed in the house. Neither are Trump supporters. Another renter says his home won't welcome Borg, Vorgons, Lannisters, Sith, or Trump supporters, whatever that means. It's not clear whether any of this is illegal. The Fair Housing Act does not ban political discrimination, though D.C. law does. For some reason, instead of calling this what it is, housing discrimination, the New York Times labeled these ads, quote, a small act of defiance, apparently part of the resistance. Think they use the same words if the politics were reversed? Probably not. Well, a demoralizing new study finds that a majority of America's young people oppose the First Amendment. In a survey of 12,000 high school kids, just over 50% of respondents said people should not be allowed to use any offensive words in public. An even larger percentage said people should not be allowed to make offensive statements on social media. The blunt question, are we doomed? John Sotsky is the Director of Strategy and Assessment at the Knight Foundation, which commissioned the survey there for the First Amendment, thank heaven, and he joins us now. John, is there any reason not to be really bothered by this? Isn't one of the key things you learn in school as an American that our country is predicated, among other things, the First Amendment? But they don't seem to have learned that.
Well, first off, good evening, Tucker. Thanks for having me. I think there's some bright lines around the findings themselves. We find that actually in the 12 years that we've been doing this survey to test the attitudes of high school students towards the First Amendment, support on some metrics has never been higher. 91% of students agree that people should be allowed to express unpopular opinions. But as you're referring to, when you start to ask them about should people be allowed to express opinions that are offensive, then support starts to dip.
Oh, it doesn't just dip, it goes below 50. The majority says no. And so how can you be for the First Amendment if you don't think that people should be allowed to say things you disagree with?
It's a great question. So I think one hypothesis is that students don't truly appreciate what the First Amendment is, and that part of the First Amendment isn't a right not to be offended. But the other aspect here is that I think increasingly, whether it's through media segmentation, whether it's through social networks, people are self-identifying into tribes. They're like-minded, and they're not exposed to the opinions of others. And I think that's increasing a lack of tolerance to hear viewpoints that are not ones that they're accustomed to encountering through the networks that they travel in.
And they're kids, and so they're judgmental and lacking wisdom and all the things that go along with youth, in addition to good health and optimism. I guess what's really striking, though, is teachers agree with them. So according to your survey, and thank you again for doing this survey, almost half of teachers, adults in charge of our kids, agreed. 53% agreed that you have the right to exercise your First Amendment rights, but 47% said you don't. So how did that happen?
You know, adults tend to be slightly more supportive of First Amendment issues. In this case, the discrepancy is not that much. It's always funny. There's always one question about whether students should be allowed to publish whatever they want in the school newspaper. That's the only one where students are more supportive of First Amendment rights than teachers are.
Right.
But for the most part, That's right. That's right. But generally, it's pretty close, and it shows you we can't just ascribe this to a younger generation's views. This is actually a fairly common held view, and when you start to dig deeper into First Amendment attitudes, even internationally, you find when you ask questions that are about offensive free speech, support dips noticeably.
But I mean, you don't see this as a crisis? So the people teaching, so we go to work and we leave our kids in the care of adults who we believe are making them better people, but it turns out that almost half of them don't believe in the First Amendment, which is like the bedrock of American life, culture, civilization. So it makes us different. It's what we have of value. And they don't believe in that? Like, shouldn't we do something about this? Like, teach them?
Well, yeah, so civics education is certainly one course, but I think it's not just a matter of teachers. And what you find in the survey is this isn't about blue states or red states. This is 12,000 students and nearly 1,000 teachers who are surveyed across all states in the country. So this is an issue that we're encountering across the board, and really thinking about how we become more tolerant of other viewpoints.
You know as well as I, because you do the surveys, that support for the First Amendment is noticeably higher among conservatives than among liberals. And that kind of jumps right out at you.
I haven't seen that. I think it's an issue that that really spans the spectrum. Quite frankly, I think whether it's incidents in Berkeley, which I know you've covered on your show recently, or people upset about Colin Kaepernick's gestures earlier in the year, I think you find outrage on both sides when it comes to different forms of freedom of expression.
Outrage is fine. If you're allowed to be outraged, you're not allowed to prevent other people from saying what they think. Maybe that's the distinction. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Americans possess a lot of rights, and the number is growing. The Constitution guarantees the rights of free speech, free religion, and the right to bear arms. Judicial alchemy has created brand new rights, such as abortion, gay marriage, etc. Is it time for yet another, the right to a job? That's what economist Mark Paul is arguing. In a recent column for the Jacobin magazine, Paul says the government ought to offer a job guaranteed, paying at least $23 grand a year to anybody who wants one. He says this would permanently fix the problem of the working poor. Is it madness or brilliance? Maybe both? Professor Paul joins us tonight from Raleigh, North Carolina. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
I'm not here to attack you. I think there is a huge problem as we transition out of an industrial economy with what people do for a living, and clearly we've left a lot of people behind. The first thing that bothers me about your idea, though, it does seem like giving up. It feels like admitting that some people are never going to be integrated into whatever the new economy is. They can't succeed, so let's just put them on the dole, in effect. Is that what it is?
Absolutely not, Tucker. First of all, thanks for having me on. But I have to say, I couldn't disagree with you more on this fact. I believe strongly in American workers. But what I think is, right now, the market is failing far too many. Right now, we have 15 million Americans that are unemployed or looking for full-time work and simply can't find it. I think that anybody who wants to work should be able to find a job, and that's what this program does. And when you talk to employers, what do they want? They want an educated and skilled workforce. How do workers build skills? They build it through working. Talk to employers, one of the biggest problems they have is the fact that they don't want to hire people that are unemployed. Let's put people to work. Let's help them build skills. The best way to acquire those skills is on the job. And through this type of program, we could really be rebuilding our infrastructure, which will also help private businesses exceed and expand.
See, I don't think anything you've said is crazy at all. And so again, I'm taking you seriously because I think there is a problem, and you've identified it, and God bless you for doing that. The problem I have with it, though, is that people will not work unless there's an incentive to. I won't. I'd sit around all day if I didn't have to work. And so what's the incentive for people to take these jobs? Would you eliminate current welfare programs?
No. First of all, 15 million Americans, again, want to work. They're actively seeking employment, and the private market is not providing them. You're going to tell me that those 15 million Americans don't want to work? I'm sorry, but there's plenty of Americans that want to work and simply can't find jobs right now.
So what jobs are these? Where do they come from?
Hold on a second there. Right now, there are 4 job openings for every 10 workers seeking employment. There's simply not enough jobs for these workers. So it's not about people not wanting to work. It's about the market not providing adequate employment for these workers. This program will do that. So now you asked me about the types of jobs. Plenty of types of jobs. I mean, Americans walk outside of their front door every day and see plenty of things that we could be investing in as a society. Building schools, building roads, creating high-speed rail. Right now, we're living in a 20th century economy. We need to update. President Trump has been continuously talking about being the jobs president. He wants to rebuild America's infrastructure. You know what? I would like to, too, and this type of program could provide the labor for that type of program.
Right, but you've got to get immigration under control, because $23,000 a year is higher than the per capita income of over 150 countries, including the biggest countries, China, Brazil, Russia, India, Mexico, which is right there. If you don't shut the borders, you would have a massive influx of people coming here to take advantage of a guaranteed $23,000 a year, obviously. What would you do about that?
No, right now we're talking about providing jobs to citizens. In some ways there's shortcomings with that, but right now this is a program to put Americans back to work. We already see legislation that's been put forth that is similar to my idea by Congressman Conyers. And the legislation applies to American citizens that are seeking a job. There are 15 million of them that would like to work, and I would like to put them to work. This type of program can do that. And you know, when you're talking about what types of jobs these are, again, we could be investing in human skills too. Let's talk about things like universal child care. You know, let's talk about taking care of the elderly. There's plenty of jobs that can be done. And if, you know, we can't think of those jobs, I think that's a failure of our imagination rather than the fact that there's not sufficient work to be done in this country.
I tend to agree with you there. I guess my last sort of skeptical instinct comes from the fact that I'm around government workers all the time. My dad was one. Some of them are great, but some of them treat their jobs like they're a joke. Go to the DMV. That's a real thing. You go there, you know that. They don't take their jobs seriously. And so why wouldn't these 15 million workers in new government jobs have the same attitude?
You know, I think that people genuinely want to work. There's a tremendous amount of dignity to work, and that these individuals, if given an opportunity, I'm a firm believer that folks will want to work, will do a good job, will, you know, be productive members of our society. We simply want these people to contribute to our society. They want to contribute. We want to let them contribute.
All right.
But right now, they're not given a fair share of doing that, a fair shot at doing that, and this program can
I
give
agree
them
with
just
your
that.
aim. We're out of time. Professor, thank you. Well, if you saw that mob of violent young leftists setting fires outside of UC Berkeley last week, the obvious question may have occurred to you. What's going to happen to these people when they grow up? Will they embrace reality and responsibility and the bourgeois values that produce stable, happy societies? Well, as it happens, our Fred and Rod Dreher at the American Conservative received a letter recently from a reader who is pondering that very thing. Her conclusion? Don't bet on it. Her name is Annie, and here's part of what she wrote. Quote, "The power of the meritocratic society gives our untitled aristocrats a belief in the rightness of their rule through the power of resume and college credentialing. They can jet to Southeast Asia for a semester, volunteer in South America for a year, travel to Turkey twice in a year, and never think at all about their carbon footprint. They dine out more than any generation ever has, but they vote the right way and never think about warehouses or trucking lines. They're the children of neoliberal boomers, and they stand to inherit their parents' and grandparents' wealth and power. They criticize the faces of that power while embracing the underlying premises. It's an enormous mistake to think they're going to grow up and accept things. I know too many of them. They are the Obama bureaucrats still in their jobs, the lawyers in California mid-level institutions, the doctors, the foreign correspondents. They are revolutionaries, but the revolution strangely keeps all wealthy urbanites like themselves in their real simple lifestyles. It's a revolution forced upon the lower classes that gets corporations to signal their allegiance. The colleges are at the center of this revolution for a reason. They give the credentials. If the kids ever start rejecting the college system, then we'll know something has changed. This is the toxic rot of meritocracy. We are watching the scions of the upper middle class and the wealthy justify their rule to themselves and to us through a progressive status politics that leaves the poor rotting on drugs, jobless, fatherless, hopeless. It almost makes you long for an aristocracy where power was an accident of birth, where there were reciprocal obligations. Interesting that the gap between the rich and the poor has never been greater than the global meritocracy. And there it is. And that's about it for us tonight. Tune in each night at 9 to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Be sure to set your DVR for the show if you haven't already. And be sure to watch Sean Hannity. He's up next. Have a great weekend.
Too much to say.